Let the lights dim now. Let your shoulders sink and your breath slow as we travel not through fantasy, but through the corridors of time, into a world half remembered and half forgotten. Tonight, you'll be visiting a different kind of history, not the stories of kings or conquest, not gleaming swords or shining thrones, but something quieter and far more unsettling. We'll walk the shadowy paths of medieval medicine, a place where illness was not cured but questioned, where pain was not soothed but studied, and where your best hope for healing might come from prayer, a knife, or a handful of garlic. Here, science was just a whisper, easily drowned out by fear, myth, and tradition. A fever could be divine punishment. A cough might mean sin. And the man standing above your sickbed, whether monk, barber, or midwife, often had no more answers than you did. But this isn't a tale told with panic or dread. Instead, we'll drift gently through the 8 quiet horrors of healing in the Middle Ages. Each one a glimpse into how people tried, in earnest and in error, to hold death at bay. So close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the soft candlelight of this story flicker in your mind, and allow yourself to step back into a world of boils, blood, and barber surgeons, with a body with mystery and medicine, a kind of medieval hope. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so we have more motivation to produce better quality products. But now let us begin. Segment 1, Boils, Blood, and Barber Surgeons. Illness arrives at the door. Imagine this. The year is 1327. A gray sky hangs low over the thatched rooftops. Smoke curls lazily from chimney holes. Rain has softened the dirt roads into sluggish veins of mud, pooling in quiet corners of the village square. You are inside a modest stone house, not poor, but far from wealthy, and the fire burns low. And then the coughing starts. It's your youngest son, only a boy, barely 7 winters old. It began last night, just a tickle, just a wheeze. But now he lies still, flushed with heat, sweat beading along his hairline, his eyes wide with fever and confusion. His breath rattles softly, too softly. What do? You do not call a doctor, not because you wouldn't, but because there are none. Not really, not in the sense we understand today. There are learned men, of course, physicians trained in Latin and logic, but they are rare, distant, expensive, and most of all, they are not the first ones you think of. No, before medicine comes meaning, and meaning must be found in the unseen. You whisper a prayer. You light a candle for Saint Sebastian, protector against plague. You wonder, what has your household done? Has your son sinned? Have you? Did your husband fail to tithe last month? Did your daughter speak harshly of the priest? Have the stars moved against you? Was there an omen you missed? Because in this world, the medieval world, illness is not simply physical. It is moral. It is spiritual. It is cosmic. The world as a web of divine order. To live in the Middle Ages is to live inside a web of meanings. Every star, every birth, every bruise, every withered crop has a cause that lies beyond the visible. The cosmos is ordered, and God is its architect. He sees, he judges, he corrects. And when correction comes, it is often through suffering. Disease, then, is not random. It is not microbial. It is not the result of invisible organisms or contaminated water. No, it is punishment or perhaps a test. It may be a warning, a cleansing, or a divine chastisement. To be ill is to be marked, sometimes personally, sometimes communally. A nobleman might be stricken for pride. A peasant might fall ill from envy. A village might suffer an outbreak because someone among them is harboring a hidden sin, or because the town failed to appease the saints. A child might suffer for the failures of their parents. There is no microscope in this world, only mirrors and prayers. The influence of the church. It is the church that holds the keys, not only to heaven, but to healing. Monasteries are repositories of knowledge, yes, but also of doctrine. They teach that suffering, when borne patiently, purifies the soul. They teach that the sick are close to God because they walk the path of Christ's passion. And so, in sickness, you do not begin with medicine. You begin with confession. A priest is called. He brings oil, incense, and holy words. He anoints the forehead. He hears sins, forgives them. He may recite the prayers for healing or the prayers for the dying. He does not diagnose. He does not examine. He performs his role in the spiritual drama, connecting this moment to eternity. You are not just sick. You are under judgment or in grace. The difference is not always clear. Sometimes, the priest asks if you've seen anything strange: a black cat at the window, a woman walking against the wind, a strange mark on a doorpost. Because sometimes the illness is witchcraft or envy or the evil eye, and then the question becomes, who wishes you harm? The role of astrology and stars. For the few who have access to a physician, or more likely, a traveling doctor of uncertain credentials, the consultation is not unlike a reading of runes. He may ask your name, your birthday. He may pull out a chart, a wheel device that maps the positions of celestial bodies. The stars, after all, govern the humors. The moon draws blood. Saturn brings melancholy. Mars stirs bile and fever. He may inspect your urine, not under a microscope, but by holding it to the light in a glass flask. He observes the cloudiness, the sediment, the scent. He compares its color to a reference chart. Pale? Too much phlegm. Red? An excess of blood. Dark and oily? Possibly divine wrath. He may take your pulse, gently, as if listening to a whisper from your soul, and conclude that Venus is out of alignment, or that your body is at war with the season. And so, he recommends fasting, or prayer, or bleeding, of course, but that comes later. Why this view made sense, then, from our modern perspective, it all sounds absurd. But to the medieval mind, it was not foolishness. It was coherence. It was order in a chaotic world filled with danger, disease, and early death. The belief that sickness had meaning was strangely comforting. Better a punishment than a mystery. If you are being punished, then you can repent. If the stars are out of balance, then time will pass and they will realign. If it is witchcraft, perhaps the right herb or priest or accusation will fix it. The idea that illness simply happens, that it is a random biological event, would have been far more terrifying. And so, people sought answers in incense and relics, in pilgrimages and charms, in whispered prayers said by candlelight, in tears shed on cold stone floors, in the hope that the fever would break or that heaven would be merciful. Because when illness arrives at the door, you do not call a doctor, you call a priest. You search your soul. You scour your home for signs of the unnatural. You ask the heavens to explain what your body cannot. You've prayed. You've whispered your confessions, lit your candles, placed your hands upon your child's fevered brow, and hoped the saints were listening. Still, the heat rises from his skin in invisible waves, and the room around you begins to feel heavy. His breath becomes thinner, shorter. The stillness of the evening is broken only by that soft, shallow sound. Not yet a struggle, but something that makes your chest ache to hear. You know, without needing to say it, that you cannot wait any longer. Help must be summoned. But when help comes in the medieval world, it does not arrive in the form of someone with soft hands and studied eyes. You do not expect a doctor in the modern sense. There's no one in this town who owns a stethoscope or can name an infection. Real physicians, those educated in universities like Paris or Bologna, are few and far between. They are expensive, proud, and most often serve the nobility. They dress in robes of dark wool and velvet, read in Latin, and consult books before they consult people. They might visit a manor, but they do not come to simple homes or crumbling corners of a keep. In your world, when illness grips the body and worry seizes the mind, it is a barber surgeon who comes. He arrives without ceremony. His cart is pulled by a tired mule. His boots are muddy. His hands are large, scarred and strong. He smells faintly of iron and old sweat, and something you cannot quite name, a mix of candle wax, animal fat, and dried herbs. He wears a thick apron, and across his back, he carries a roll of tools, wrapped in leather and tied with cord. He does not speak much. He has seen too many cases to waste words. With a glance at your child, he knows what to do. He is not here to explain. He is here to act. He takes the boy's wrist, feels the warmth, the faint beat beneath the skin. He lifts one eyelid, examines the glassy gaze beneath. He nods slightly, but not with certainty, with familiarity. This is not new. He has seen it before. The child burns. The humors boil. Balance must be restored. And so, without asking, he reaches for his blade. It is a small, sharp lancet, honed on leather, clean perhaps, but not by methods you would recognize. He wraps a cloth tightly around the child's upper arm, watching the skin rise and the veins swell slightly beneath. He finds the spot, and with a quick motion, pierces the skin. There is no scream, only a soft gasp. Blood wells up slowly, dark and sluggish, and drips into a shallow bowl placed below. To bleed a patient is not innovation. It is tradition. The belief runs deep, from ancient Greece to the Roman world, carried through the centuries by Arabic medicine and monastic scribes. An excess of blood, they say, causes fever. Drain the excess, and the fire will subside. You do not question it. It is what people do. Some barbers carry charts, not of the body, but the stars. They consult the zodiac to determine the best time for bleeding. Certain days are believed to favor the release of corrupted blood. Some veins are associated with certain organs or maladies. The vein in the arm for fever, behind the knee for headaches, the ankle for problems of the womb. A skilled barber surgeon knows which veins to open, how much blood to let, and when to stop. Not because of scientific training, but from experience passed down like an heirloom. Yet mistakes happen. Too much blood can weaken, even kill. But if that occurs, it is said the disease was too strong, not the treatment too harsh. When the blood slows, he presses a cloth to the wound, binds it tightly. He does not speak of bacteria or sterilization. He wipes his hands and reaches into another pouch, pulling out a jar filled with thick greenish paste. This is his poultice, a blend of herbs, grease, ashes, and sometimes less pleasant things. Garlic, onions, ground mustard seed, lard, and crushed charcoal. He spreads across the child's chest, his brow, or the soles of his feet, wherever the illness seems to linger. He mutters something low, not quite a prayer, not quite instruction. You are to leave the paste for a day, or until the fever breaks. Change the cloths. Keep the fire lit, but do not overheat the room. Air must move, he says. Spirits must flow. He may reach for a bundle of dried herbs, rosemary perhaps, or thyme, and toss them on the coals. Smoke fills a room, sharp and resinous. This is not just the scent. It is believed the air can turn foul during illness. Invisible vapors, known as miasmas, are said to cling to corners and cling to lungs. The smoke is thought to purify, to chase away the corruption. He may advise you to slice an onion and place it near the child's bed. It will draw the sickness. He says, if the onion blackens, it means the illness has been absorbed. If it does not, perhaps the stars are not yet favorable. Some barbers carry amulets, bits of scripture, relics, or coins marked with saint symbols. Others offer charms. A sprig of rue tied in red thread, a small iron nail hidden in the child's pillow, a mirror turned toward the wall. These are not trinkets of superstition alone. They are acts of quiet desperation, passed from one fearful household to another. And through it all, the priest may return, standing in silence or murmuring prayers as the poultices are placed and the blood dries in its bowl. The sacred and the practical are never far apart in this world. One heals the body, the other, the soul, but neither truly knows how to stop the fever. They simply know how to respond to it. Perhaps, if you're lucky, the barber will recommend a concoction to drink. Boiled water with wine or vinegar or crushed fennel seeds. Perhaps the boy will sweat in the night and wake a little cooler. Perhaps not. And when the work is done, the barber surgeon gathers his tools. He does not promise recovery. He does not offer certainty. He wraps his blades. He nods once, and he leaves just as he came, quiet, unhurried, heavy with the knowledge that he will be called again. You are left in silence. The child sleeps fitfully. The room smells of onions, smoke, and old blood. A single candle flickers on the windowsill, and in that dim glow, you wonder not what more can be done, but whether what has been done will be enough. Even after the barber surgeon has left, even after the blood has been drawn and the herbs have been laid across the chest, something remains unresolved. You feel it in your bones, in the weight behind your ribs, in the stillness of the room. The child breathes, yes, shallow but steady, but his forehead is hotter than ever. His hands twitch now and then, and his skin is damp, as though the fever is burrowing deeper rather than fleeing. And so, when medicine fails, or perhaps before it has truly begun, you do what has always been done. You reach for what is close, what is remembered, what is whispered between mothers and grandmothers, over bread or over graves. You turn to the old remedies, the household rituals, the things that are not written in books, but passed hand to hand and voice to voice, never quite the same, but always familiar. Not medicine exactly, not science, but something that lives between hope and habit. You begin in the corner, with a small wooden box wrapped in cloth and twine. Inside, dried herbs, bits of root, 2 candles with a smear of wax missing, and a necklace made entirely of garlic cloves strung together by stiff, yellowing thread. It is meant to be worn, especially by children. The cloves, still fragrant after all these months, are believed to ward off fever, to keep away spirits, to protect against the invisible dangers that slip through cracks in the night. The smell is strong, almost sour, but comforting in its own way. You hang it carefully over the boy's neck, adjusting the thread, so the clothes rest above his chest. You whisper, though you don't know to whom. Next, you turn the hearth. A small fire burns low, the last of the good wood already used. Beside it, a bowl of water that was blessed last Easter, or perhaps the one before. You dampen a rag with it and wipe the child's forehead. This is not about temperature. This is about memory, about doing something, doing anything, doing what your mother did, what hers did before her. The water drips slowly down his temples, and you pat it dry with a cloth that's been soaked in rosemary tea, cooled in a shaded corner. Your neighbor once told you that a spider wrapped in linen and placed beneath the tongue could draw out the poison of a fever. You do not have a spider, but you do have a dried beetle, found in the storeroom months ago. You hold it in your palm, uncertain, before placing it gently beneath the boy's pillow instead. The gesture is half-hearted, but in this moment, it is not about faith. It is about motion, about not stopping, because stopping feels like giving up. A small pouch hangs above the doorway. Inside it, crushed mint leaves, dried rose petals, and a pinch of ash from last year's fire. It is meant to guard the home, especially in times of sickness. The pouch was sewn by your aunt, long past now. The thread is loose, but you do not touch it. It stays where it is, silent and watchful. The air in the room smells of too many things: garlic, sweat, onions, smoke, yet it feels safer than silence. You recall another remedy, one meant for chest tightness and lingering fevers, a paste made of goat dung, mixed with vinegar and barley flour, applied warm to the soles of the feet or the curve of the spine. You hesitate. The idea repels you, even now, but your cousin swore it worked. She used it once on her husband, who recovered 3 days later. Whether it was the paste or time or mercy, no one could say. Still, you fetch the small clay pot behind the stable. The contents are foul. You mix them with sour wine, mash it into a thick gray pulp, and apply it with shaking hands to a strip of old linen. You wrap the child's feet. Try not to breathe through your nose. Some remedies rely on reversal. Symbolic actions meant to undo the illness by acting in opposition. You're told that turning your garments inside out and sleeping with a knife under the bed will confuse the spirits, causing the sickness. So, you turn your shift inside out, slip your husband's knife beneath the straw mattress, and lie down beside the boy. You do not sleep. You watch. Other cures are gentler, if no less strange. A tea made of boiled dandelion and honey, given in sips each hour. A compress of cabbage leaves soaked in cold water, laid across the chest. A charm written in charcoal above the threshold. Pax tecum. The fever shall pass. You remember the words, though you've never seen them written. You write them anyway, shaky letters drawn on the stone, just above eye level. Still the fever stays. At dawn, you crush cloves and cinnamon together and mix them with old red wine. You press the mixture to his wrists, hoping to sweeten the blood. You rub mint onto his temples, not for scent but for clarity. The child stirs once, murmurs something you cannot hear, and falls quiet again. By midday, you have exhausted all that you know. You have burned dried yarrow. You have poured vinegar on the threshold. You have peeled a turnip, wrapped it in wool, and placed it beneath his bed. You have whispered his name 100 times, and you will whisper it again. All of these acts, the salves, the smoke, the charms, the paste, may seem like shadows now, but in the world you live in, they are the closest thing to control that you can grasp. They are your thread through the dark. They may not cure, but they soothe. They give shape to waiting. They remind you that you are doing something, that you are not standing idle while illness rages in your home. These household remedies, however humble, form the foundation of healing for most people in the medieval world. Not because they are proven, not because they are effective in a way we might measure, but because they are shared, remembered, trusted, because they offer a way to respond to something vast and terrify with something small and human. In many households, the women are the keepers of these remedies. They know which leaf to crush for fever, which root to chew for nausea, which mixture to apply for swelling. These are not merely wives and mothers. They are the frontline physicians of the medieval poor. They are not always called healers, but they heal, not always with success, but always with intent. And when they succeed, the credit goes to the saint. When they fail, the fault lies in the stars, or sometimes in the woman herself. Some will say these remedies are foolish, that they are old wives' tales, that they do nothing. But in a time before penicillin, before microscopes, before the germ was even a theory, these small rituals are what stand between life and death, despair and dignity. You check the child again. His breath is still shallow, but his forehead is not as hot. Or perhaps your hand has grown numb. It is hard to tell. Still, you sit with him. You whisper one more prayer. You breathe, and you wait. Because sometimes in the medieval world, the most powerful cure is not a tincture or a knife. It is hope wrapped in ritual, repeated again and again, like the ticking of a clock you cannot hear, only feel. And sometimes, that hope is enough to see the morning. Segment 2, the theory of humors, balancing what was never there. And so, night fades slowly into morning. The fire has long turned to embers. The child still breathes, and that is enough for now. The remedies, the bleeding, the smoke, the garlic, they may have worked or they may not, but they were all guided by something deeper, something older than memory itself. Because in the medieval world, sickness is never just a symptom, it is a sign. And health is not the absence of pain, it is balance. Balance between forces seen and unseen, warmth and cold, wet and dry, spring and winter, joy and sorrow. And most of all, balance between the four humors believed to live inside every body. Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, each ruled by the heavens, each tied to the soul. To treat illness, one must restore this fragile harmony. If you are feverish, it is because your blood burns too brightly. If you are melancholy, perhaps your black bile has risen too high. And so begins a journey, not a diagnosis, but of alignment. In this next part of our quiet exploration, we will follow those ancient fluids and see how they shaped every decision about life, death, and the spaces in between. To truly understand how the medieval mind approached healing, you must step not into a sick room, but into a worldview. Because in the Middle Ages, the body was not just flesh and blood, it was a vessel of invisible forces, a miniature universe governed by laws that echoed those of the stars, the seasons, the winds. This was not superstition in their eyes. It was reason. It was structure. It was the best knowledge available, and it gave illness a name and healing a purpose. That knowledge was rooted in a theory first articulated long before Christ walked the earth by physicians in ancient Greece. It was passed along to Rome, preserved by Arab scholars, translated in monasteries, and woven into the very foundation of European medicine. This was the theory of the four humors, a system that would guide treatment, diagnosis, personality, even diet for over 1,000 years. According to this theory, your body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each one had its own qualities. Blood was warm and moist. Phlegm was cold and moist. Yellow bile was hot and dry. Black bile was cold and dry. These might sound abstract, but to a medieval mind, they were deeply personal. Each humor was tied to a season, an element, even a time of life. Blood belonged to spring, to air, to youth. Yellow bile was summer, fire, early adulthood. Black bile was autumn, earth, middle age. Phlegm ruled winter, water, and old age. Harmony between these fluids meant health. Imbalance meant suffering. So if you had a fever, your body was too hot. Your blood or yellow bile had risen. If you were lethargic, dull, heavy-limbed, you had too much phlegm. If you were irritable or prone to rage, yellow bile. If you were prone to sadness, depression, or long brooding silences, it was black bile. Even personality itself was framed through the humors. A cheerful, optimistic person was said to be sanguine, ruled by blood. A cold, methodical person, phlegmatic. A melancholic person was slow, thoughtful, sorrowful, shaped by black bile. And those hot-blooded, quick-tempered souls? They were choleric, driven by yellow bile. The balance of humors could shift with age, mood, weather, diet, even music. Physicians would look for these patterns in everything and in everyone. A good doctor, it was believed, could tell your temperament just by how you sat, spoke, or slept. Did you crave warmth or coolness? Did you sweat freely or shiver often? Did you favor red wine or white? Did your dreams run anxious or absurd? All were clues. All pointed to the humors within. When illness struck, the first question wasn't always what the symptoms were. It was which humor had taken control. Diagnosis was the art of listening for imbalance. The doctor might inspect your complexion, your stools, your tongue. But most telling of all was your urine. It would be caught in a clear flask, held up to the light, and studied with great seriousness. The color, sediment, scent, even the way it frothed when shaken, each detail spoke volumes. Pale and cloudy might mean phlegm. Red and frothy might signal an excess of blood. Dark and oily, black bile. They had no concept of infection, no knowledge of bacteria, viruses, or immune systems. But they believed in pattern, in equilibrium. When your body ached, it was because its internal climate had changed. And to restore health, the physician or barber or midwife or monk had to restore that internal weather. The humors didn't only explain the body, they explained the cosmos. Each humor was linked to a planet, a metal, a god. The human body was a mirror of the larger world, a fragile balance of hot and cold, dry and wet, light and dark. The microcosm within reflected the macrocosm without. This was comforting. It meant you were not isolated. You were connected to the rhythms of the heavens. And so, a physician might treat a fever not just by bleeding or herbs, but by asking what day it was, what phase the moon had reached, which planet ruled the hour. If Mars, hot and dry, was ascendant, perhaps your illness was more dangerous. If Venus, warm and moist, ruled, maybe recovery was closer. The humors gave form to uncertainty, turning chaos into categories. When a child was born, its initial cry, its color, its manner of feeding were watched carefully. These were signs of its temperament, its future ailments, its personality. Some children were declared melancholic from birth, prone to sadness, withdrawn. Others were choleric, restless, defiant. The humors offered not just diagnosis, but destiny. Even foods were judged through this lens. Every ingredient had qualities. Heat, moisture, dryness, coldness. Meat was warming. Cucumbers were cooling. Wine was hot and moist, unless aged. Cheese was cold and dry. Physicians might prescribe not just treatments, but menus. A feverish patient might be told to avoid garlic, to sip watered wine, to consume barley porridge. Bread baked too hard might be too dry for a melancholic. Fish caught on a full moon might be too cold for a phlegmatic. Nothing escaped the framework. Hospitals, such as they existed, might organize patients by humoral type. In monasteries, charts were drawn up to track the behavior of brothers, to guide diet, prayer, even tasks. A brother prone to melancholy might be given gardening work. Under the sun, a choleric might be sent to copy manuscripts, where discipline would cool his fire. And when the humor became dangerously unbalanced, more drastic measures followed: vomiting, purging, sweating, bleeding. But those are for another segment. For now, it is enough to understand this. To live in the Middle Ages was to live in constant negotiation with these invisible fluids. And while we may smile at the simplicity of it now, we must also recognize its beauty. It gave people something to hold onto, a story to place around their suffering, a way to understand why they felt what they felt, a way to believe that healing was possible. If balance could only be found again, you stir in your blanket now, perhaps imagining which humor might rule you. Does your body tend toward cold or heat? Are your thoughts restless or still? The questions don't demand answers. They only invite reflection. And as you drift further into this quiet evening of forgotten medicine, we move gently forward. When blood, fire, and ash became the tools of care, if health was harmony, and illness and imbalance of the four humors, then the cure inevitably was to restore that balance. But in the Middle Ages, this was not done gently. The body, it was believed, had to be corrected, nudged, pushed, purged, until the wayward humor gave way and peace returned. A fever? Cool the blood. A heavy stomach? Expel the phlegm. A sluggish mind? Lighten the bile. To live under the humoral model was to live in a state of constant adjustment. And when you could not eat the right foods or pray under the right stars, the body had to be manually rebalanced. The most common tools of this rebalancing were threefold: vomiting, purging, and bleeding, each believed to flush, drain, or pull away the excessive humor responsible for your suffering. We begin with vomiting. Induced vomiting was thought to rid the body of undigested or corrupted matter, often linked to excess yellow bile. The stomach was seen not as an organ to be protected, but as a kind of furnace. If it burned too hot or smoldered with bad food or bile, the system suffered. The solution? Emetics. Bitter potions made of herbs like hellebore, squill, or even powdered metals such as antimony or copper salts. Taken on an empty stomach, these substances would force the body to convulse, to eject, to release what was held inside. The patient might be told to drink warm salt water in great quantity, or a tea made of wild herbs, so bitter the taste itself brought sickness. Sometimes a feather was used to tickle the throat, sometimes a string soaked in vinegar. To us, this may sound extreme, but to the medieval mind, it was no more invasive than a sneeze. It was the body cleansing itself. When the stomach emptied, it was believed the imbalance lessened. The heat cooled, the bile was cast out. Then there was purging, the opposite end of the process. Purgatives were used to clean out the bowels, especially when black bile or phlegm were thought to have gathered in the gut. Laxatives came in many forms: boiled rhubarb root, senna leaves, fig syrup, or even mixtures of honey and ground salt. For stronger cases, dried castor oil seeds or the bark of the alder tree might be used. The result was swift and brutal. The body flushed, weakened, but hopefully restored. In extreme cases, physicians might prescribe a purgative regimen lasting several days, alternations of fasting, fluid, and purging until the patient was visibly exhausted. But that exhaustion was a sign of success. The body had given up its poisons. Some even practiced sweating cures, wrapping the patient in woolen blankets by the fire, feeding them hot teas, and sealing them inside rooms thick with heat and steam. The goal was to force the body to perspire, to release illness through the skin. In more affluent households, sweating might be aided by hot baths infused with herbs like sage, rosemary, and lavender. But for the poor, a single corner by the hearth, thick with smoke and fever dreams, had to suffice. Of course, we have already spoken of bloodletting, but it must be said again, for its importance cannot be overstated. To many medieval practitioners, blood was a dominant humor, warm, wet, vital, and so it was also the most dangerous in excess. Bleeding could be prescribed for nearly any ailment: fever, headache, indigestion, melancholy, even fatigue. Specific veins were associated with specific organs: the inner elbow for the heart, the temple for the brain, behind the knee for the liver. The physician or surgeon would select a site, bind a limb, and cut with a lancet, observing the color and flow. Leeches were also used, not only for the poor, but among nobles who viewed them as a more refined form of bleeding. The leech would be placed carefully on the skin, allowed to bite, and encouraged to feed until sated. Then it was removed or fell off on its own. A single session might involve several leeches and more than one round. The belief was simple: If a humor was dominant, it had to be reduced. And the more violent the symptom, the more aggressive the treatment. Coughing blood, then blood must be let. A distended belly, then the bowels must be cleared. A disordered mind, then perhaps trepanning. The removal of a section of skull might allow the trapped humor to escape, but the suffering caused by these treatments was rarely seen as cruel. On the contrary, suffering was understood as part of healing. A patient who vomited until weak, who bled until dizzy, who purged until empty. This was not a tragedy. This was the cost of balance. The pain was necessary, the discomfort meaningful, and so people submitted. They took the powders. They drank the broths. They lay still as their blood was drawn and their stomachs roiled. They sweated beneath woolen blankets and whispered psalms with cracked lips. They endured because the logic made sense. The humors could not be seen, but they could be felt. And if the healer said they must be drained, then drained they must be. These treatments were not hidden. They were common, ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that they became metaphors in daily speech. A bad mood might be called a surge of bile, an impulsive act blamed on hot blood, a quiet sadness on too much black humor. The language of the humor is soaked into the bones of culture, just as the treatments shape the fabric of daily life. It is easy now to recoil from these ideas, to wonder how anyone survived them. And yet, in their time, they offered something precious, a reason, an explanation, a framework in which to suffer without despair. You were not broken. You were simply unbalanced. And with the right purging, the right diet, the right hands, you might be made whole again. As we continue this quiet descent into the practices of medieval medicine, we will soon reach its most feared and fragile moment, when illness struck not one, but many, and the air itself was thought to carry death. But first, let the body rest. Let the humors settle. Let the remedies fade into the slow breath of night. We will meet the plague gently in time. By now, you begin to understand that healing in the medieval world was rarely a matter of simply asking, where does it hurt? The body, for all its aches and rattles, was not trusted to speak clearly. Its signals were ambiguous, its noises misleading, its pain too private. Instead, the physician, or more often the barber surgeon or wise woman, turned their attention not to the words of the patient, but to the signs that could be read in the stars, in the color of urine, in the hue of the skin, or the way a fever broke at dawn rather than dusk. The sick might murmur through chattering teeth, or say little at all, but a learned practitioner looked for patterns, not stories. They listened not with the ear, but with the eye. And perhaps no two things mattered more to a medieval diagnosis than the heavens above and the chamber pot below. Let us begin with the stars. In an age where the calendar was governed by the church and the seasons by the sun, it is no surprise that illness, too, was believed to be governed by celestial forces. Astrology was not a separate field from medicine. It was a foundation. The stars were seen as God's great clock, a divine map laid across the night sky, filled with influence and intention. To fall ill was to fall out of harmony with that map. And so, the healer looked upward before they looked inward. The first tool might be a zodiac chart, a wheel divided into 12 houses, one for each astrological sign. Each house ruled over a part of the body. Aries the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms and lungs, all the way down to Pisces, keeper of the feet. A pain in the stomach under the sign of Virgo was not treated the same way as one felt under Scorpio. The moon's phase was equally crucial. A waning moon called for purging. A waxing moon favored strengthening the body. Bloodletting was rarely performed during a full moon. The body was thought to be too swollen, the blood too abundant. And if Saturn was ascendant, known for its cold and dry influence, a melancholic imbalance might be assumed. The stars did not whisper a diagnosis. They shouted it in their own language. And so a physician might consult an ephemeris, a table of astronomical data, before visiting the sick. He might ask not only what symptoms were observed, but when they began, not simply what hurts, but what hour it started. If it was Tuesday at dawn, perhaps Mars ruled the moment. And if Mars ruled, then inflammation was suspected. Heat, war in the blood. A cooling remedy would be needed. One must treat not only the illness, but the hour. This might seem strange to us, grounded as we are in germ theory and lab reports. But to the medieval mind, there was no clear division between the physical and the spiritual, between heaven and earth. All things were connected. The human body was a constellation of its own, a mirror of the cosmos. If the stars were in disorder, it was only natural the body would follow. Still, astrology was only half of the diagnosis. The other half, perhaps even more intimate, was urine. Yes, urine. If the stars told the physician when and where the body had gone wrong, the urine told them how. It was the most direct, most observable sign of internal imbalance. And it was studied with a level of care that might surprise the modern listener. Urine was caught in a specially made flask, a clear, rounded vessel called a medulla, often bulbous at the base and narrowing at the neck. The medulla was designed to hold and display the urine, so its properties could be examined in full daylight. The physician would raise it to the sun, turning it gently in hand, watching how the light passed through it. He did not taste it, though earlier physicians, including Galen, sometimes had. By the later Middle Ages, observation alone was preferred. The doctor would examine the color first. Was it pale, suggesting excess phlegm? Yellow, hinting at bile? Red tinged, speaking of hot blood? Then the clarity. Was it cloudy, suggesting infection? Opaque, signaling coldness? Next, the sediment, what lay at the bottom? Flakes, streaks, crystals? And finally, the froth, if any, the way bubbles clustered or broke apart on the surface. Books were written on urine. Charts were drawn with detailed watercolor illustrations, each shade given meaning. A skilled practitioner could tell your humor imbalance, organ condition, even spiritual disposition from the contents of a single flask. Some believed that urine produced under stress or fear appeared darker. Others thought it changed with the lunar cycle or absorbed the mood of the sufferer. It was not a perfect science. It was not science at all, but it was structured. It gave form to chaos. It allowed the healer to say, I see, the illness is of the liver. The yellow bile is in excess. We must bleed you from the ankle on Thursday morning under the waning moon. And in that sentence, there is both logic and comfort, a plan, a path, a promise of action. Compare this to the alternative, asking the patient, listening to their pain, their confusion, their fear. To the medieval mind, this was unreliable. The body lied, the mind wandered, but the stars were eternal. The urine, observable. What could be seen and charted was safer than what could be said. Even in more humble settings, the home, the monastery, the market town, these rituals remained. A mother might hold her child's urine to the light and see if it glowed too brightly. A monk might log changes in color from day to day. A midwife, trusted by her neighbors, might sniff the flask gently and nod. Whether out of certainty or habit, it didn't matter. The act itself carried meaning. There is something almost tender in these gestures. The way the medulla is cradled like a lamp. The way a physician consults both sky and flask with equal solemnity. In a world with so much suffering, so little control, this was a way to say, we see you, we see something. We will try. And so, diagnosis became an act of observation, not listening to the person, but to the signs, the color of urine, the phase of the moon, the timing of the fever, the temperament of the patient, as judged by their silence or speech, their posture or pulse. It was not personal, but it was careful, and that care, even misguided, was often sincere. As you rest now, perhaps you could imagine the quiet of the sick room, the light from a single window, the physician holding the glass vessel to the sun, nodding slowly, not because he knows, but because he believes. And next, as we move deeper still, we will turn toward the body in motion, the body in crisis, and the harsher treatments that follow diagnosis, when burning, bloodletting, and enemas became the standard course. But for now, let the candle burn low. Let the sky hold its stars. Let the medulla sit quiet on the shelf, its golden liquid fading in the dusk. There will be time to purge what comes next. Segment 3. Bleeding, burning, and purging. The standard treatment menu. There's something solemn about preparing to bleed a patient. The tools are simple: a blade, a cloth, a bowl, but the act itself is filled with ritual, quiet calculation, and a belief as old as medicine itself. In the Middle Ages, to draw blood was not only a treatment, it was a philosophy made flesh. Blood was life, yes, but it was also danger. It could overheat. It could rise too quickly. It could thicken or pool or grow restless within the veins. It had to move, to circulate, to stay in proportion with the other humors: yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. When it didn't, the body paid the price. And so, when a patient burned with fever or swooned with headache or shivered with unknown chills, the answer was often the same: let the blood go. The act of bloodletting was commonplace. It could be found in noble halls and peasant cottages alike. It was practiced in city hospitals and village stables. It was done by physicians, certainly, but more often by barber surgeons, monks, even midwives. It required not years of training, but the steady hand of tradition. Imagine now the scene. A patient sits upright, their arm extended, elbow resting on a wooden plank. The room is quiet, the fire low. The practitioner wraps a cloth around the upper arm, tightly, to raise the vein. The skin is tapped gently, searching for the slight swell beneath the surface. Then, without flourish, a lancet is drawn, small, sharp, crescent-shaped. The skin is pierced, and the blood begins to flow. Into a shallow bowl it runs, dark at first, then lighter. The practitioner watches, counting perhaps, or judging by color and consistency. There is no precise measurement, no stopwatch, no sterile gauze. Just instinct, memory, and the slow pooling of life in a basin. For some, the sight is calming. The sickness is being drawn out. The heat is lessened. The head feels lighter. For others, it brings nausea, faintness, or fear. But none question the practice. It is too familiar. It is too deep in the bones of medicine. Specific veins were thought to correspond to specific organs. A cut in the forearm might be for a liver complaint. A vein in the temple for headaches. Behind the knee for ailments of the spleen. Even the amount of blood drawn depended on the diagnosis. A mild imbalance might require a few ounces, while more serious cases could see pints removed, sometimes repeatedly over days. Children were bled. Pregnant women were bled. The elderly were bled, though with greater caution. There were charts that recommended the best days for bloodletting based on the phases of the moon, the zodiac, even the weather. A hot day might increase the risk of draining too much. A stormy night might agitate the humors further. Timing mattered. The stars were always consulted, if not by the practitioner, then by those watching. Leeches offered a gentler form of bleeding. These small, black worms were collected from ponds or swamps, kept in jars, and placed on the skin with care. They attached with surprising speed, their saliva containing a natural anticoagulant that ensured smooth, steady feeding. A single leech might drink several times its own weight in blood before detaching. For more intense cases, several leeches might be used at once. Placed on the back, the neck, the temples, leeches were prized by some for their cleanliness. They left smaller wounds, reduced the chance of infection, but they were also expensive. Not everyone could afford them. And in truth, their use was more symbolic than practical. They took less blood than a lancet, but they fit neatly into the language of healing. They were living instruments, part of nature's tool set. In rural areas or among poorer patients, bleeding might be done with horns, not the kind sounded in battle, but small curved vessels used in wet cupping. A small incision was made, then the horn was placed over the wound and suction created, sometimes with heat, sometimes by mouth. The result was a slow drawing of blood, and, it was hoped, corrupted humors along with it. The pain of bleeding was not often recorded in detail. Perhaps it was so common that no one thought to describe it. Or perhaps, as with so many medieval sufferings, it was simply endured. There was no anesthesia, no numbing balm, only the sharp edge, the pressure of the cloth, the quiet patience of the one being bled. And yet, for all its prevalence, bloodletting was rarely effective. At best, it offered temporary relief, a lowering of pressure, a calming of pulse. At worst, it weakened the body further, invited infection, or hastened death. But this was not known. Or if it was suspected, it was rarely spoken aloud. When patients recovered, the bleeding was praised. When they worsened, it meant the humors had been too far out of balance, and perhaps another letting would be needed. The language around bloodletting was rarely one of certainty. It was about chance, about rhythm. An art, not a science. Some barbers were known for their skill. Light hands, clean cuts, wounds that healed swiftly. Others had reputations for recklessness, for over-bleeding, for trembling fingers. But even the clumsy were trusted more than doing nothing, because in the face of sickness, doing something, anything, was always better than waiting. Hospitals, such as they existed, had bleeding schedules. Monks and infirmaries might bleed each other seasonally as a form of prevention. It was thought to clear the body of excess, to reset the system. One might be bled in spring to prepare for summer, or in autumn to ward off winter chills. These maintenance bleedings were sometimes recorded in household books, along with crop cycles and holy days. There were, of course, voices of caution. Some healers warned against overuse. Others argued for moderation. But their words were lost in the greater tide of tradition. Bloodletting had the weight of centuries behind it. It was what had always been done. And so, when you sat across from the barber or the monk or the wise woman with her bundle of tools, you did not ask why. You rolled up your sleeve. You looked away. You let the blood fall. And when it was done, you pressed a cloth to the wound, drank a little wine, and waited to see if the dizziness would pass or grow. The bowl of blood would be thrown outside or into the hearth. It might be marked, watched, stirred to see how it clotted. Some claimed it spoke of the illness itself. Thick, dark blood meant a deep imbalance. Thin and bright meant surface heat. Clotted blood meant cooling was needed. It was not waste. It was a message. And as you sat in that quiet room, pale and tired, there was often a strange peace. Something had been done. The sickness had been faced. The body had given up its offering. Perhaps it was enough. Once the blood was drawn, the patient would often sit quietly, weak, pale, but hopeful. The humors, it was believed, were shifting. Realignment had begun. And yet, in many cases, this was only the beginning of the healing process, not its end. Because when illness lingered, or when symptoms grew stronger, or when the stars spoke of deeper disorder, more aggressive treatments were called for. Some were meant to draw out the illness. Others sought to shock the body into submission. The goal was always the same: to restore balance between the invisible forces that govern health, by whatever means necessary. And so came the next tier of remedies: cupping, cauterization, and purging. We begin with cupping, an ancient technique carried through centuries by Greek, Roman, and Arabic physicians, still practiced in the medieval world with simple tools and steady hands. In its most common form, wet cupping, a small incision was made in the skin, just enough to breach the surface. Then, a cup was applied over the wound. This cup might be made of glass, horn, or even polished metal, and a vacuum was created inside, sometimes by burning a small amount of alcohol within it just before placing it against the skin. As the air cooled, it contracted, and the skin was drawn up into the cup. The result was strange to look at: a tight swelling, dark and round, often rimmed with bruising. Blood seeped slowly from the incision beneath the cup, drawn by the vacuum. This process was believed to pull the corrupted humors out through the skin, especially from areas afflicted by pain or swelling. It was common to cup the back, the shoulders, even the temples for headaches, or near the spine for fevers thought to dwell deep within. The sensation was painful but bearable. Patients described a pulling, a burning, a dull ache that lingered for days. The bruises could last longer, but this was seen as proof that the bad humors had been drawn out. In dry cupping, the same suction was used, but without bloodletting. It was gentler, sometimes used for older patients or children, believed to stir the humors without weakening the body. The visual effect was dramatic: circles of purple rising across the skin like quiet echoes. But the marks were not feared. They were familiar, a sign that something had been done. More intense than cupping was cauterization, the deliberate burning of flesh to seal a wound, stop bleeding, or destroy internal corruption. To us, it sounds brutal. And it was. But in an age without antiseptics, without antibiotics, without knowledge of infection. Fire was the one true purifier. There were two forms of cautery. The first, direct, involved heating a metal rod or blade over flame until it glowed red, and then pressing it to the skin. This was used in amputations to stop bleeding, or on wounds believed to fester with illness. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. There was no sedation, only straps to hold the patient still, or hands to press them down. The hiss of flesh under iron, the smoke, the smell, and then silence. The second form was chemical cautery, which used substances like lime, sulfur, or arsenic compounds to burn the skin slowly, without fire. These were mixed into paste or powders and applied with a wooden spatula. The reaction was slower, but equally painful. The goal in both cases was destruction of tissue of infection, of imagined disease hidden deep beneath the surface. Cauterization was also used symbolically. To burn the site of an illness was to make war against it. A fever in the chest, burn the shoulder. A swelling in the leg, cauterize the thigh. Sometimes the location was less anatomical than astrological. A practitioner might say that a certain sign, say Aries or Leo, governed the disease part, and that burning a corresponding point would cool the influence. In this, medicine and magic once again walked hand in hand. It is difficult to describe the courage required to submit to cautery. There are few writings from patients themselves, but the procedure was seen not as barbaric, but as bold, a last resort in the face of danger. To be burned was to be saved, perhaps, or to die trying. And then there were the purgatives, a class of remedies designed to clear the body from within, where bloodletting drew the humors out through the veins and cupping through the skin. Purging attacked them through the stomach and bowels. These were the daily bread of medieval medicine. Every healer, from the learned physician to the herbalist in the forest, had their favorite recipe. A typical purge might begin with laxative tea, brewed from rhubarb root, senna, or buckthorn bark. The taste was bitter, earthy, sometimes metallic. The reaction could be gentle or explosive. In stronger cases, dried castor beans or croton oil might be used. These were far more dangerous, causing violent cramps and severe dehydration. But they were effective in the medieval sense. They emptied the body, and emptiness was health. Vomiting was also induced when needed, often with infusions of white hellebore, known for its bitter potency. Taken with warm water or wine, it triggered the stomach to empty itself repeatedly, leaving the patient exhausted, pale, trembling. But it was hoped reborn. The theory behind these practices was always the same. What was inside had become impure. It had to be cast out, whether upward or downward, through blood or bile. The corruption must not be allowed to settle. To purge was to fight back, to cleanse. One of the most common tools for this cleansing was the enema, a practice older than the Middle Ages, but very much alive within it. Enemas were administered with long tubes of leather or horn, tipped with cloth or wool to protect the lining of the rectum. Liquids were poured into a bladder, often made from animal stomachs, then squeezed or allowed to drip by gravity into the patient's body. What was inside the bladder varied: warm water, vinegar, honey, soapwort tea, even wine. Sometimes the mixture included mustard or salt to increase urgency. In monastic settings, enemas were administered quietly, regularly, even ritually. Among nobles, they were viewed as a sign of refinement. Better to clear the bowels by choice than suffer indigestion later. Among the poor, they were a tool of desperation. Enemas were not only for illness, they were part of preventative care. Some patients received them weekly, even daily, especially those considered sluggish, melancholic, or overly damp. The results were immediate, and the body, once emptied, was thought to be more open to healing, more balanced. These treatments, cupping, cautery, purgation, were not acts of cruelty. They were acts of belief. Belief in a system that made sense of suffering, that gave the healer something to do, that gave the sick something to endure. And in a time when illness so often led to death, that belief was sometimes the only medicine available. To us, these procedures seem brutal, even frightening. But imagine living in a world where nothing could be seen and almost nothing could be cured, where a cough could become a funeral, where fever took children in the night, where the body gave no warnings, only silence or screams. In that world, to burn, to purge, to bleed, it was something. It was action. It was resistance. And so, the patient drank the tea, lay on the board, bit the cloth, took the heat, endured the flow. They did not cry out. Or, if they did, no one wrote it down. The pain was not the focus. The healing was. And when the process was finished, there was always a moment of quiet. A moment when the body, emptied and trembling, seemed to hover between two states, harm and hope. A moment when the patient was not yet better, but not worse. A moment where the sickness had been challenged, if not defeated. And in that moment, the room grew still. The fire dimmed. The healer wiped his tools. The patient closed their eyes. And everyone waited. Asterisk. There are few procedures in medieval medicine as quietly consistent and as quietly peculiar as the enema. It may seem strange to us now, almost laughable in its simplicity, but in the world of the Middle Ages, enemas were no joke. They were regular, serious, sometimes ritualistic. They were administered not just during illness, but as a matter of routine. And for many, they offer the only real sense of control over a body ruled by invisible fluids and unseen forces. The logic was clear. If something was wrong inside and could not be cut out, burned off, or bled away, it might be flushed. The belief in the power of cleansing the bowels was ancient. The Greeks had written of it. The Romans, too, in monastic hospitals and noble households. And even in some market towns, the tools and recipes for enemas were carefully maintained and passed along. They were not hidden or whispered about. In fact, they were often welcomed. Because for many, the enema was relief. Unpleasant, yes, but reliable, predictable, and above all meaningful. The basic tools were simple. A long, narrow tube, often made of leather or hollow horn, a bladder, frequently crafted from the stomach of a pig or goat, used as a squeezable reservoir, and a liquid, selected based on the illness, the season, the temperament of the patient, and the preference of the healer. To administer an enema, the patient was laid on their side, sometimes on a table, sometimes on a mat or straw bed, knees drawn slightly up. The nozzle was carefully lubricated, usually with oil or animal fat, and inserted into the rectum. Then, slowly, the liquid was allowed to flow. The sensation, naturally, was uncomfortable. There are few accounts from patients themselves, but there are many from observers, from monks and healers and writers of medical handbooks. The procedure was often followed by cramping, a period of waiting, and then a dramatic expulsion of the contents of the bowels. It was messy, it was noisy, but it was regarded with respect, because when it was done well, it worked, and it was believed to do more than simply clear the stomach or lower intestines. The enema was thought to cool the body, especially in cases of fever or inflammation. It was also used to treat melancholy, drawing out excess black bile, and to relieve headaches, which were often seen as rooted in digestive disorder. Even madness, especially in women, was sometimes attributed to an imbalance in the lower body that could be soothed or released through this method. Some enemas were designed to be retained. These were called clysters, made from gentler ingredients like chamomile tea, milk, or almond oil. The goal was not to evacuate, but to nourish from within. These were especially prescribed to the weak, the elderly, or those recovering from more aggressive treatments like bloodletting or cauterization. But most enemas were intended to purge, and purge they did. The contents of the liquid varied widely. Among the most common were herbal decoctions, warm water infused with mallow, marshmallow root plantain, or wormwood. These plants were chosen for their soothing properties, their cooling effects, or their association with purification. Others were more stimulating. Mustard seed, onion juice, or garlic, meant to rouse the humors, stir the belly, awaken a sluggish system. In wealthier homes, wine might be used, especially red wine mixed with salt or vinegar. Milk, too, sometimes combined with honey, believed to soften the inner lining of the gut and encourage gentle flow. Soap, often lye-based and harsh, could be added when urgency was needed, and in the most extreme cases, boiling water was used, or at least water still steaming, hot enough to shock the system and provoke immediate evacuation. These hotter enemas were reserved for severe cases when illness was thought to have taken deep root. The healer might say, the fire within must be met with fire. The burning sensation that followed was regarded not as a mistake, but as evidence that the body was responding. Among monks and clergy, enemas were more than medical. They were scheduled. In many monasteries, infirmarians, monks assigned to care for sick, kept detailed records of when brothers received enemas, what was used, and how they responded. In some communities, a weekly enema was part of routine, thought to preserve spiritual and physical purity. A clean body, after all, better served a clean soul. This was particularly true in the Benedictine tradition, where diet was rich in bread, cheese, and heavy pottage, foods that could lead to constipation, bloating, and imbalance. The enema was a gentle countermeasure. It prevented buildup. It promoted humility, and it offered a rare moment of attentiveness from one brother to another, a small, awkward ritual of care in a world defined by silence and rules. Among nobles, enemas were often a matter of preference. It became fashionable in certain courts, notably in 14th century France, to take a clyster before dinner or before sleep, to aid digestion or sleep more comfortably. For them, the process was cleaner, more refined. The equipment was silver, perhaps the ingredients perfumed with rose water or mint, and the procedure administered by a trusted servant or apothecary, discreetly with dignity preserved. But among the poor who had no doctors and fewer remedies, enemas were often the last resort. If a child had not eaten in days, or an elder groaned to a night with belly pains, the village healer might arrive with a goatskin bladder, a horn, and a pot of steep herbs. The patient would be laid on straw, the nozzle inserted, the liquid poured. There was no embarrassment, no shame, only the shared hope that something would be released, something would shift, something would give. Sometimes the treatment worked, the fever broke, the belly softened, the moan stopped, and when it didn't, there was still the comfort of having done something, of having acted, tried, poured something warm into the dark places of the body where words and prayers could not reach. It is easy now to find humor in such images, the clyster, the goat bladder, the steaming bowl, but to laugh is to miss the deeper truth. This was care. This was medicine in its own form, rooted not in precision, but in tradition, in rhythm, in repetition, in the belief that the body, though mysterious and often cruel, could be persuaded, soothed, softened, sweetened, if one simply tried long enough. And so, throughout the Middle Ages, the enema held its place, not at the center of medicine, but always close at hand. It was never dramatic, never surgical, but it was steady, quiet, and in its own strange way, profoundly intimate. For what is more vulnerable than lying on one side, trusting another to handle the most private part of the body, not with ridicule, but with routine, to be cared for not through speech, but through warm water and hands that did not tremble? Segment 4, Pestilence and Panic. When plague walked the streets, there is a hush in the street, a quiet unlike any other. Not the peace of early morning, nor the lull of night. This quiet is heavy, strained, filled with tension. No carts rumble by. No children shout. The baker's shop stands cold. The church doors are closed. The bell, usually tolling the hour or the call to prayer, now rings only for the dead. You have heard rumors for weeks. Whispers carried down the roads like drifting ash. A sickness, they say. Something spreading. Something different. First it came through the ports, then along the rivers, then overland, faster than a storm, quieter than snowfall. They call it many things. The great mortality, the pestilence, God's breath, the Black Death, and today it has arrived in your town. At first, it is only one house, a family gone still, the shutters closed. Then another, then two more by the end of the week. Soon, every block holds at least one home where no smoke curls from the chimney, no laughter leaks through the windows, no footsteps echo in the courtyard. You begin to carry herbs in your sleeves. You stop greeting friends with a kiss. You walk with your head turned, breath held, heart drumming softly in your chest. When the physician arrives, you almost do not recognize him. He is wrapped head to toe in dark cloth. Thick, oiled robes meant to repel moisture. His gloves are tight, his sleeves bound, his face hidden behind a mask shaped like the head of a great bird. The beak jets forward, curved, hollow. Two glass circles mark the eyes. He moves slowly, deliberately, and when he walks, children scatter. Even dogs keep their distance. This is not costume. It is medicine, or what medicine has become. The mask is filled with pomanders, mixtures of strong-smelling herbs, spices, and resins. Rosemary, lavender, camphor, cloves, myrrh, mint. The belief is simple. The plague rides on bad air, miasma, invisible clouds of poison wind that sink into lungs, rot the breath, corrupt the blood. The herbs are meant to purify the air before it enters the nose. The beak gives space for the vapors to be caught and cleaned. Sometimes, the physician also carries a stick, not as a weapon, but as a tool. With it, he can lift the patient's blanket, prod a body, push open a door, all without touching. Touch is death. Proximity is danger. The mask is safety, but also distance. The patient becomes something to be handled, not held. He might carry burning herbs and a censer, swinging it gently as he walks, or small balls of wax soaked in perfume, pressed to his masked nostrils. He may write notes on parchment, giving instructions. Shut the windows. Burn the bedding. Do not bleed this one. The body is too weak. But often he says nothing because he has no answers. These physicians, those who remain, are not the high scholars of Paris or Salerno. They are often hired from afar, paid in coin or food or protection. Some have training. Others have only courage. Many will not stay long. Inside the sick room, the air is close. The smell is hard to describe. A mix of fevered breath, damp cloth, old wood, and something beneath it all. Rot perhaps, or decay, or fear. The patient lies still. A man in his 30s, or a child, or a mother with her infant. It makes no difference. The signs are the same. The swollen glands beneath the arms or the groin, buboes, hard and hot, painful to the touch. The blackening of the fingertips, the cracked lips, the blood that stains the bed sheets without wound. The physician observes, records, shakes his head. He may apply a poultice, cut the buboes to release the poison inside, or recommend prayer, isolation, and fresh air. But deep down he knows, as many do, that nothing truly helps. And so he leaves, quietly. He writes a mark on the door, sometimes a painted cross, sometimes a word, Lord have mercy, sometimes only silence. People say the bird mass frightens the plague. Others say it is warned so the dead will not recognize the living. But no one says it is comforting. It is the face of death's arrival, civilized, prepared, distant. A reminder that the tools of medicine, when confronted with something too vast, too fast, too cruel, can do little more than look. Yet even the mask is an attempt, an act of hope, however desperate, a way to believe that the body can still be protected. That knowledge still matters. That breath, if filtered and perfumed, might be spared. Outside, the physician walks back down the alley. Behind him, a door closes, a window shuttered, a prayer whispered, a candle extinguished. And tomorrow, there will be more. There's a stillness in the air that no breeze can lift. The birds have gone quiet. The cobbled streets, once filled with the echoes of hooves and the chatter of vendors, now carry only the low, hollow sound of wooden shutters being closed. If a door creaks, it closes quickly. If a child cries, it is hushed. If a bell rings, it is not for prayer, but for the dead. You do not need to be told that the pestilence has arrived. You can feel it. At first, it comes as rumor, the kind that floats like smoke, a sickness in the south. A merchant ship docked in Genoa, its crew dying where they stood. A caravan on the road to Avignon, its passengers coughing blood before vanishing from sight. The talk is soft, cautious, filled with disbelief, but it spreads faster than truth. Whispers at the well, eyes glancing skyward at signs in the stars. And then, just as quickly, the rumors become names. A cousin, a neighbor, a child. The distance collapses. The sickness is no longer a story. It is a presence. And with it comes a one figure whose arrival is dreaded almost as much as the illness itself. The plague doctor. You see him for the first time on a pale spring morning. The dew has not yet lifted from the thatched roofs. The baker's door is still bolted, and the church bell has not rung. He appears at the edge of the town square, moving slowly, deliberately, with the stiff posture of someone carrying more than his own weight. He is dressed entirely in black, layers of wax linen covering every inch of his body. His robe hangs long, brushing the tops of his leather boots. His sleeves are drawn tight, sealed with cord. His gloves are thick and stiff. He is a silhouette with no face, only a beaked mask, long and curved, as if borrowed from some strange carrion bird. The mask is the most unforgettable thing. It juts forward like a hooked nose. The beak stuffed with strong scented herbs, rosemary, lavender, camphor, cloves, even crushed juniper berries or vinegar-soaked cloth. There is no mouth, no expression, just two glass lenses, round and blank, where the eyes should be, giving the look of something neither living nor dead. Some say the beak is meant to scare away the plague spirits. Others say it is simply to filter the air, a practical barrier against miasma, the foul air believed to carry the disease. He carries a staff, not for walking but for distance. With it, he lifts bed sheets, tests for breath, pushes open doors. He does not touch. He cannot. The staff is also used to fend off the desperate, the begging, the mad, those who try to cling to him, mistaking the mask for mercy. The first home he visits belongs to a merchant. The man inside had been strong just days ago, laughing loudly in the square, pouring wine too generously at the tavern. Now, he lies curled on a straw-stuffed pallet, half naked, slick with sweat. His skin is blotched, darkening in strange places. Beneath his arms, the flesh has swollen grotesquely. Buboes, they call them. Hard, hot, and painful. Blackened fingertips, bleeding from the gums. A rasping breath that does not deepen. The plague doctor does not speak. He kneels slowly. He studies the patient without expression. He opens a leather pouch and removes a small vial of herbs. A cloth, a curved scalpel. The bubo may be lanced to release the poison, but only if the patient is strong enough to endure the pain. Often, it makes no difference. Sometimes he brings a book, worn at the edges, containing the names of those visited, their symptoms, their status, living, dying, dead. He records what he sees, though he rarely writes a sentence longer than a name. There is no diagnosis, only observation. He may advise burning the linens, sealing the room, painting a mark on the door, a white cross, sometimes red, a warning to others, a prayer left behind. The herbs in the beak do little. The knowledge of the doctor, even less. But still he comes, day after day, home after home. He does not look into the eyes of the families. He does not pause for comfort. He is medicine incarnate, not because he cures, but because he witnesses. And what he sees is more than a body failing. He sees a world unraveling. In towns touched by plague, the rules vanish. Markets go silent. Priests bury their own without rites. Nobles flee to the countryside. Servants disappear in the night. The baker's oven goes cold. Doors are locked not to keep thieves out, but to keep breath in. Bread is left at thresholds. Coins soaked in vinegar. People walk the long way around each other, clutching bundles of rosemary to their mouths. Some call it punishment. Others believe it is the end. The stars, they say, have turned. The air is corrupted. The Jews are blamed. The foreigners feared. The midwives accused of dark arts. Fear feeds on itself. In some towns, processions of flagellants arrive. Barefoot, half-naked men whipping themselves in the streets, chanting prayers, begging God for mercy through pain. In others, silence reigns. Families vanish behind closed shutters and do not emerge again. And always, the plague doctor walks. His figure becomes part of the landscape, like a crow perched on a dead tree. Children watch him from cracks in walls. The elderly cross themselves when he passes. He says nothing. He cannot. He is part of the ritual now. His presence alone speaks. The sickness is here, and you cannot stop it. He may carry pomanders, small balls of pressed herbs and wax, wore around the neck or hung at windows. He may recommend that fresh flowers be placed near the patient's face, or that vinegar be boiled and inhaled. But these are gestures, not cures. signs of hope, not solutions. When he arrives at a home, it is not to save, it is to record. Some flee at his approach. Others fall to their knees, begging. He does not respond. He walks forward. The beak dips slightly, and then he passes. And in his wake, only silence remains. Still he comes, because someone must. Because even when healing is impossible, presence matters. Even when knowledge fails, witnessing matters. He cannot stop the dying, but he can acknowledge it. He can place a hand, gloved, distant, on a forehead and say, without speaking, "You are not alone." He is the last face many will see, a face without eyes, a voice without breath. And yet, he is also a symbol of what medicine once meant. Not mastery, but endurance. And so, as the days stretch on and the plague claims more lives than any sword or famine before it, the doctor keeps walking, through alleyways thick with smoke, through doorways where no laughter lives, past churches where the candles have burned out. He walks slowly, always forward, always alone. And as night falls and the shutters close once more, you may catch a glimpse of him in the distance, a silhouette with a curved beak, fading into mist. You pray he does not turn toward your door. At first, there are efforts. The bells ring. The priests come. The townspeople gather at a distance. Prayers are whispered. Psalms chanted beneath breath. Herbs are thrown into the hearth. And the air is made thick with rosemary and rue. The sick are given warm broth, water from the well, and pieces of dry bread wrapped in linen. Neighbors still check in, standing at a safe distance, speaking through doors, leaving bundles at thresholds. But the days grow darker, and the plague moves faster than kindness. Soon it becomes too much. Too many homes, too many bodies, too many doors marked with chalk. The city begins to change its rhythm, or more accurately, to stop altogether. The church bells fall silent, except the toll for the dead. The priests, overworked and underfed, begin to disappear. Some collapse where they stand. Others flee. The dead are buried quickly without rites. A whispered prayer, if anything, a cross scratched in the dirt. Grief becomes mechanical. Loss becomes routine. And then, slowly, people begin to close their doors and not open them again. There are those who bore themselves in willingly. Entire families choose to seal their homes with nails and planks, hoping to outwait the pestilence. They stuff rags beneath the door. They avoid windows. They survive on dried beans and stale bread. Days pass in silence. Then weeks. Then only silence. Others are boarded in by force. In some towns, local authorities, desperate to contain the spread, begin to seal homes with visible signs of sickness. Men wearing scarves over their faces carry boards, hammers, iron nails. They do not ask permission. If someone inside is seen coughing blood, if a bubo is noticed through a window, if the stench becomes unbearable, the choice is made. The door is nailed shut. Food is left outside, but not for long. When the knocking stops, no one answers. Inside, families are left to fate. The mother nurses a child until she cannot. The son watches his father's breath slow to a stop. The youngest forgets the names of the others. They are not criminals, but the condemned, sealed in not with malice, but with terror. In the alleys and streets, a strange silence settles. Cats walk freely. Chickens scatter unattended. Horses wander with empty saddles. Some houses still have smoke rising from their chimneys. Others are cold. The line between the living and the dead grows thinner by the hour. Here and there, people are seen dragging bodies to the edge of town. Sometimes, it is one man pulling a cart with 2 or 3 wrapped bundles. Sometimes it is a mother, alone, dragging her daughter on a sled meant for firewood. She does not cry. She does not speak. She leaves the body near the trench and walks away without turning back. The graves are no longer individual. There are too many. First, they are dug in fields, long, narrow trenches. The bodies are layered. Earth, then corpse, then more earth. Shovels work from sunrise to sundown. In the beginning, the dead are placed carefully. In time, they are dumped. There are those who resist this. Families who try to bury their loved ones properly. But even then, the danger remains. Touching the body is feared. So they wrap the dead in cloth, soaked in vinegar or rose water. They sing softly, alone. Then they retreat. In cities, the dead are piled onto death carts, drawn by hired men who walk slowly through the streets, ringing a bell. "Bring out your dead," they call. Sometimes no one comes. Other times, bodies are left on the threshold, covered with sackcloth. The collectors do not look closely. They do not ask names. They load the cart and move on. The town itself begins to divide between those who are already sick and those who believe they are not, between those who stay and those who flee. The nobles, if they have not already retreated to their country states, do so now. They leave behind servants, food stores, even relatives. The merchant class tries to hide, behind closed shutters, behind masks, behind herbs, but the pestilence finds them too. Markets are abandoned, schools close, taverns fall quiet. Even the thieves vanish, for there is nothing left to steal but illness. And still, new cases appear. A man who has not left his home in weeks begins to cough. A girl, locked indoors with her family, develops a fever. A monk collapses mid-chant. The plague is not slowed by silence. It does not respect doors. It moves unseen, from hand to cup, from cough to cough, from breath to breath. Soon, people stop helping altogether, not out of cruelty, but exhaustion and fear. You see someone fall on the street. You do not rush to help them. You cross to the other side. You hold your breath. You walk faster. It is not that you are unkind. You are simply afraid. Afraid to bring death back to your family. Afraid to become the next name unspoken. Some villages become ghost towns overnight. Doors left swinging. Bread still on tables. Fires burned down to ash. No farewell. No explanation. Just absence. Elsewhere, a strange new normal begins to form. Those who remain adapt. Criers walk the streets, reading out the names of the newly dead. Notices are posted, which wells are safe, which homes are condemned. Children play quietly out of sight. The elderly pray from their beds. Life does not stop, but it shrinks. Weddings are postponed. Funerals are rushed. Baptisms are whispered. Births go unnoticed. No one counts the days anymore, only the bodies. And through it all, faith flickers. Some pray harder. Some stop praying entirely. The church offers no answers. The stars remain silent. The remedies fail. The masks do not protect. The walls do not hold. Even the plague doctor, once a symbol of hope, becomes a distant figure, a shadow passing at the end of a lane, a black silhouette pausing at a doorway. His presence is no longer comfort. It is confirmation. Confirmation that someone inside has begun to die. And still the world turns. The sun rises. The wind stirs the branches. Somewhere, a baby is born. Somewhere, someone recovers. The plague does not last forever. But for those who live through it, time itself warps. Days blur into one another. The past becomes unreachable. The future unknowable. All that remains is this. The present, silent and strange. And so you stay inside. You press your ear to the door. You listen to footsteps. You smell the air for smoke. You wait for the sound of the bell. And you pray, not for a cure, but for distance. The days stretch long, and the sun begins to feel unfamiliar. It shines, yes, but not with warmth. It glares with indifference. No season seems to change the pace of the dying. Whether the frost sets in or spring blossoms return, the pestilence walks beside the living like a shadow that no candle can chase away. And as the graves deepen and the prayers quiet, the truth becomes hard to ignore. Nothing is working. The physicians, once summoned with coins and candles, now hesitate to enter homes. The herbal poultices, packed with rosemary, lavender, sage, wormwood, no longer bring comfort. Garlic hung at the windows fades to brown. Holy relics are kissed until the silver wears thin. Bloodletting, once considered the cornerstone of healing, is now feared more than illness. The leeches fall off limp. The bleeding weakens the patient. The cuts fester instead of cleanse. The rhythm of healing has fallen out of step. In this vacuum, a new rhythm begins to rise. Not medicine, but a ritual, fear, and blame. People begin to speak in hushed voices about the need to appease something. A wrath, perhaps, a cosmic correction, a divine anger. Because if the illness is not of the body, then surely it must be of the soul. And if prayer and penance fail, perhaps suffering must be invited, willingly, visibly, and so come the flagellants. They arrive without warning, a slow column of bodies winding their way into the village square, barefoot, robed in white or linen, faces drawn, eyes sunken. Many carry wooden crosses, some drag chains, others clutch relics or images of the Passion. At first glance, they resemble pilgrims, but they do not sing hymns. They chant in low tones, repeating phrases over and over like a drumbeat beneath the surface of thought. Then, one by one, they begin to remove their cloaks. Beneath, their backs are already marked, long, raw stripes, evidence of many days and many lashes. Some are fresh, others crusted with blood, others barely scabbed. And with slow, practiced movements, they begin to beat themselves. Whips of knotted cord, sometimes tipped with metal, strike against skin with a rhythmic crack. The crowd watches, stunned. Children cling to their mothers. The elders bow their heads. The flagellants do not scream. They do not flinch. Each stroke is a confession, a plea, a bargain. Take my blood instead. Spare the others. They march from town to town, performing this ritual twice a day. In some places, they are welcomed. The townspeople join in, desperate for salvation. In others, they are feared, not because of what they bring, but because of what they reveal, that even the faithful are beginning to lose hope. But flagellation is only one response. The other is blame. As fear thickens, so too does a desire to find a cause, a human one, something tangible, something to hate. It begins with whispers. They do not fall ill like we do. They poison the wells. They have strange books, strange languages, strange gods. And so, across towns and cities, eyes turn toward the Jewish communities, often segregated, often misunderstood, often scapegoated. In times of peace, they are tolerated, taxed, even protected by kings. But in times of plague, those protections vanish like morning mist. Accusations spread that Jews have brought the pestilence deliberately, that they conspire with the devil, that their unfamiliar rituals hide secret poisons. The rumors need no evidence, only repetition. And then comes the violence. Synagogues are burned, homes are broken into, families are dragged into the streets. Some are forced to confess under torture. Others are murdered without trial. In Strasbourg, in Basel, in dozens of cities across the Holy Roman Empire and beyond, entire communities are massacred. Some are expelled, others are annihilated. The few who survive convert or flee, taking their knowledge, their stories, and their grief with them. Elsewhere, herbalists, midwives, and wise women become targets. Those who once treated the sick with plant lore, those who knew how to soothe a fever or ease a birth, are now regarded with suspicion. Their skills, once admired, now seem unnatural. If medicine fails, and these women claim to heal, might they not be causing illness too? Accusations of witchcraft surface, like bruises beneath the skin of society. A woman with too many books. A girl who speaks to animals. A widow who gathers herbs by moonlight. One by one, they are accused. Few are defended. Most are silenced. Even the skies are blamed. Comets, eclipses, and unseasonal storms become omens. It is said that the stars have aligned against mankind, that Saturn has grown cold, that Venus burns too bright. Astrologers are consulted as often as physicians, perhaps more. And in every home, charms are hung. Small bags filled with ground unicorn horn, which is in truth narwhal tusk. Pieces of parchment with sacred names. Lockets containing saints' hair, teeth, or in some cases, fragments of clothing believed to have touched a martyr. These are tied to necks, sewn into garments, hidden beneath pillows. And yet, the sickness still comes. It ignores relics. It passes through prayers. It walks over thresholds where garlic hangs and mint smolders. It finds the faithful and the faithless alike. It settles in villages and cities, monasteries and brothels, castles and shacks. And so, eventually there's only exhaustion, The flagellants pass through one last time, their songs growing thinner. The towns grow quieter still. The scapegoat's gone. The physicians disappeared. The masks left hanging on doors like wilted leaves. There is no victory, only survival. The body count slows not because of remedy, but because the illness runs out of fuel. Those who are left walk out into streets they do not recognize. They step over forgotten shoes. They pass wells filled with silence. They look to the sky and find it unchanged. And slowly the superstition fades. Not because people no longer fear, but because they are too tired to imagine more enemies. The stars still turn. The wind still carries no answers. But among the survivors, a seed is planted, a memory, perhaps, of what happened when medicine failed, when fear replaced knowledge, when pain became performance, when belief was wielded like a blade, a memory that would, centuries later, give rise to something else, a thirst for understanding, for proof, for clarity. But that is another chapter. For now, the page turns on a world that wept and bled, not just from sickness, but from desperation. And so ends a segment of pestilence and panic, where the plague was not just a disease of the body, but a mirror showing what breaks when people lose their grasp on certainty and on each other. Segment 5, Surgery Without Sleep, the Butchery of the Living. The room is dim, lit only by a flickering candle that gutters in the chill. Its wax pools slowly into a cracked dish, forgotten on the edge of a worn wooden table. The scent of iron and old sweat lingers in the air, thick and sour. Somewhere beyond the shuttered window, bells toll in the distance, not for the hour, but for the passing of another soul. You are far from the battlefield now, but the consequences of war have followed you home. You are seated on a low bench, your leg elevated, wrapped tightly in cloth that has already turned dark. The wound is festering. It reeks faintly, like damp hay left too long in the sun. The flesh is swollen, angry, weeping at the edges. You try not to look at it. You try not to think. The barber surgeon stands nearby. He does not wear robes of silk or carry books filled with celestial diagrams. He is no scholar, and he does not speak in Latin. His hands are thick scarred, stained with ink and dried blood. He is a man of tools, not theories, a craftsman, a laborer, a man called to cut because no one else will. There are no antiseptics, no anesthesia, no sterile instruments. There's only boiling water and fire, and something stronger than medicine, resolve. The surgeon does not begin with words of comfort. There is no preamble, only a nod. Then 2 assistants approach. One binds your arms behind the back of the bench. Another steadies your chest. A third grips your shoulders with the weight of someone who has done this before. You're offered a strip of leather to bite down on, or perhaps a cloth soaked in wine, if wine is available. If not, you may simply scream. The blade is not elegant. It is thick, slightly curved, sharpened to an uneven edge. It has been used before on arms, on legs, perhaps even on men you knew. It has been cleaned, yes, but not sterilized. That word has no meaning yet. What matters is speed. Because the faster the cut, the greater your chance of survival. Not just from blood loss, but from shock and from infection, though no one yet understands the word. You feel the moment he places a saw just above your knee. You feel the cold kiss of metal. And then, with a sudden pressure, the cut begins. There is no soft way to say this. Amputation is brutal. The saw does not glide. It grinds. It catches on sinew. It stutters over bone. Your vision goes white, then red, then dark again. You do not remember if you scream. Perhaps you do. Perhaps the sound stays inside, trapped behind clenched teeth and trembling lungs. The surgeon does not pause. He cannot afford to. The first cut is the deepest. With a few practice motions, he works through the muscle, then the bone, then the remaining flesh. The leg falls to the floor with a wet sound, not like wood, but like meat. But he is not yet done. The wound, gaping and raw, must be closed. Cauterized, ideally. A long iron rod rests in the fire nearby. It glows faintly red at the tip, like the edge of a dying star. The assistant brings it over, hand steady. Without ceremony, the surgeon presses it to stump. There's a hiss, then the scent, not smoke, but something more primal, a mix of fat, blood, heat, and pain. The sound is sickening, even to those who have heard it before. The skin blackens, the bleeding slows, and in time, a minute, an hour, a lifetime, it stops. You are loosened from your restraints. Your body is cold, despite the fire. You do not speak. You do not move. You float somewhere above yourself, disconnected, fragmented, aware only of breath and silence and the strange emptiness where your leg used to be. If you live, the stump will need to be packed with herbs. Honey, if you're lucky. It is one of the few things known to prevent rot. The cloth must be changed daily. The wound must be watched for signs of fever, for streaks of red, for the dull ache that becomes sharp. If it festers, the surgeon will return, and next time he may cut higher. Sometimes they attempt to make prosthetics, simple wooden pegs or strap leather boots, but most simply learn to hobble, to shuffle, to crawl. There are no crutches yet, no chairs with wheels, only willpower. And yet, despite all this, some do survive. Not many, but some. And to them, the barber surgeon is not a butcher. He is a last hope, a cruel gift, a chance to live, even half whole. These surgeries are not limited to soldiers. Infections from simple injuries, a splintered bone, a punctured foot, a swollen abscess, can all require the knife. And when they do, there is no gentle alternative. It is surgery, or it is death. There are no quiet operating rooms. Surgeries are performed in kitchens, in barns, in open courtyards. The patient is laid on a table or floor. Family members hold them down. Prayers are whispered. Rags are stuffed in mouths. The barber surgeon carries his tools in a roll of leather, knives, hooks, forceps, saws. Some carry a trepan, a circular blade used to cut through the skull. Others carry tubes for blowing powder herbs into wounds. Few of these tools are clean. Most are passed from case to case, wiped on cloth between uses. And yet, these men learn, not from books, but from bodies, from failure, from trial. They know the feel of muscles separating, the sound of bone cracking, the weight of a limb still warm. They work quickly, decisively. They do not hesitate, because hesitation kills. Many barbers begin by shaving beards, cutting hair, pulling teeth. But as demand rises, they take on more. They learn to lance boils, to drain wounds, to amputate, to stitch. Their shops become makeshift clinics. Their hands, instruments of both grooming and life-saving. They are not celebrated. They are not trusted, but they are needed. In the cities, noble families may still seek out trained physicians, those who speak Latin, who consult astrological charts, who write an elegant script. But when blood floods a boot, or when the fever will not break, it is the barber surgeon who is called, not for answers, but for action. There is no consent, no paperwork, only a knock on the door, a glance, a nod, a blade. And when the work is done, the surgeon packs his tools and leaves. He does not stay to pray. He does not wait for thanks. He moves on to the next patient, the next wound, the next chance to cut away death, or be swallowed by it. And in this way, day after day, village by village, the medieval world carves its way through suffering, not because it can heal, but because it must try. There is a strange silence to the stone room, not the hush of reverence, nor the stillness of sleep, but tense, suspended quiet, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. A man lies on the table, his arms limp at his sides, his hair damp with wine and sweat. The skin of his forehead is pale and slick, stretched tight over the bone beneath. His chest rises and falls unevenly. He does not speak, whether from unconsciousness or submission. It is hard to say. His wife stands nearby, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles pale. She has not blinked in minutes. The barber surgeon prepares his tools with the slow, deliberate motions of a man who has done this before, not because it is routine, but because the consequences of haste are too great. Beside him lies a small wooden case, unassuming in appearance. Inside are instruments worn with use and time, a bone saw, iron forceps, a rounded scraper, and the centerpiece, the trepan. It resembles a small drill, crude by modern standards, yet crafted with purpose. A hollow, circular blade attached to a handle, its edge dulled in places from cutting through what it was never meant to see. The surgeon picks it up with a practiced hand. The man on the table groans. His head injury is fresh, the result of a fall or perhaps a blow. The swelling has not gone down. He has not eaten. His eyes flicker beneath closed lids, unfocused and twitching. In the weeks before, he may have been confused, agitated, screaming at shadows, speaking nonsense. Or perhaps too quiet, a silence more alarming than noise. There are no brain scans, no diagnoses, no knowledge of cranial pressure or internal bleeding. But the signs are there. To those who have seen them before, they speak of something dangerous building behind the bone. And so, the only option is to relieve it. With no anesthetic, the surgeon begins. First, the hair is shaved, revealing the scalp beneath, stretched in over the crown of the head. A shallow incision is made in the skin, and the flap is pulled back to expose the bare skull. The assistant holds the patient still. If the man is conscious, he is given something to bite. If unconscious, his head is strapped tight. Then, the trepan is pressed to the bone. With slow, deliberate turns of the handle, the blade begins to rotate, carving a circle into the skull. Not all at once, and never too deep. The key is control. The tool must pierce the outer bone, but not slip inward. One wrong movement, one crack too wide, and the man is lost. The grinding sound is low, methodical, cruel. The scent is unexpected, not of blood, but of dust. Bone dust, fine and gray, drifts like ash onto the cloth below. The hole widens. The assistant wipes the sweat from the patient's brow. Then, with a soft crack, the final layer gives way. A small, round, coin-sized disc of skull is removed, revealing the pulsating membrane beneath. The dura mater, grayish and trembling with each breath. The surgeon may press gently, checking for fluid, for swelling, for signs of pressure. In some cases, fluid is drained. In others, nothing is done. The act of opening the skull believed to let out madness itself. If the patient survived the procedure, the flap of skin is stitched back. The bone fragment is not replaced. The wound is covered with linen and sealed with honey or resin to keep out infection. And then you wait. Some wake up with clearer thoughts. Others die within hours. Many develop fever and do not return. But there are exceptions, and those exceptions give the practice its staying power. Trepanning is not only used for trauma. In certain cases, it is prescribed for mental illness, though the term does not yet exist. Madness, possession, melancholy, lunacy. These are words spoken in dark corners, whisper about sons who scream in the night, daughters who wander into the woods, husbands who forget their own names. When prayer fails and herbs do not soothe, families turn to the blade. If a demon has entered, perhaps the hole will give it exit. If vapors cloud the mind, perhaps the skull must be vented. The beliefs are many, but the blade is the same. There are even those who seek the procedure willingly. In some regions, it is thought to grant visions, to open the third eye, to allow communion with spirits or saints. These cases are rare, but they are recorded. One man in 14th century France underwent 3 such operations and lived to tell the tale. Among healers, trepanning becomes a rite of passage, a measure of skill, a gamble with life as the stake. Monastic records describe the tools in careful Latin. Barbaric, perhaps, yet pursued with a seriousness born not of cruelty, but of desperation. The truth is simple. There was no gentler way. In a world without knowledge of germs, without understanding of pressure or trauma, trepanning was a last, fragile hope. A literal opening of the body in search of release, relief, reason. And in this act, the barber surgeon becomes something more than a technician. He becomes a seeker, looking into the human mind not through poetry or philosophy, but through the hollow circle left behind by his blade. The man on the table breathes still. His chest rises. His color is pale but stable. His wife kneels beside him, murmuring prayers to saints whose names have been worn smooth by 1,000 such pleas. She does not know if he will wake, but she knows that, for now, the madness has been given a way out. and that is all she dares hope for. The field stretches out before you like a broken quilt, torn by hoofbeats and churned by heavy boots. Where once there may have been grass or crops, now there's only mud, slick, brown, and splattered with something darker. The clash of arms has faded. The shouting has stopped. All that remains now is the aftermath. The moans begin before the fog even lifts. Some lie still, quiet in their final sleep. Others cry out, not for glory, not for victory, but for water, for mercy, for someone to see them. In this thick silence, the voices of the wounded cut more deeply than any sword. And it is here that the barber surgeon walks. He does not wear a suit of mail. He does not carry a sword. His hands are not bloodless, but his role is not to take life. His tools are wrapped in leather and slung over his back. Bone saw, forceps, cautery irons, and bandages already crusted with red. He moves quickly, not because he is careless, but because every delay is a death sentence. His first stop is triage, though the term has not yet been coined. He assesses with his eyes. Who is breathing? Who is beyond help? Who might survive if seen quickly? The dead he leaves. The dying, those whispering prayers with half a jaw or holding in intestines with trembling hands. He covers gently, offering a last word, sometimes a blessing, before moving on. Time is a cruel tutor. Emotion must wait. The barber surgeon has no clean room. His operating table is the earth. A wounded man is dragged onto a cart or sat upright against a tree. A cloak is rolled and shoved between his teeth. Assistants, sometimes squires, sometimes stable boys, hold him down. The injury is not delicate. It is a gash to the thigh, deep and open, where a pike has bitten through flesh and left the muscle torn. Already the wound is swelling. Already it smells. There is no antiseptic, no gloves. But the surgeon does what he can, cleans the wound with vinegar or wine, anything sharp enough to sting but not kill. He inspects it with bare fingers, finding splinters of wood, pieces of armor, and fragments of bone. He makes a choice. He always must. If the limb can be saved, it will be stitched. If not, it must be removed. Amputation is the brutal truth of battlefield surgery. No one survives with rotting flesh. No one lives with a crushed limb. And so, with a nod, the surgeon sets to work. The blade is curved, fast, and honed. It is wiped on cloth, then pressed into skin above the injury. A tourniquet is tied tight above the site. The surgeon cuts cleanly, through muscle, avoiding hesitation. When he reaches a bone, the saw comes out short, thick, made for speed. He works quickly, speaking calmly even as a man beneath him screams into the dirt. Once through, the stump is covered in hot cloths. The cautery iron, glowing orange in the fire, is pressed to the wound to sear it shut. The smell is foul. The sound, a hiss, a pop, is brief. Then the man falls limp, from shock or from grace. Some will survive. Most will not. But in the chaos of war, the act of trying is its own kind of victory. Barber surgeons also treat arrow wounds, using long tweezers to extract barbed heads from flesh. They use hooks to retrieve pieces buried deep. Sometimes the shaft must be pushed through and cut at the base, the head removed through the other side. There is no x-ray, only instinct and hope. Crushed bones are set with splints made from wood and cloth. Blows to the skull are managed with trepanning, though rarely attempted in the field. Burns are treated with egg yolk, honey, and goose fat, a recipe more tradition than science. The patient is soothed not with anesthesia, but with song, with touch, with whispered memory. A brother's hand, a wife's name. Pain is constant. The surgeon works amid screams. Sometimes he sings to drown them out. There are few tools, but many hands. The assistants learn quickly how to hold a man's leg while it is sawn off, how to boil linen in vinegar, how to fetch herbs from the cart. Chamomile to soothe, comfort for swelling. Poppy, when available, is prized like gold. After each procedure, tools are wiped with wine, sometimes passed through flame. But sterility is unknown. It will not be understood for centuries. At night, the surgeon writes by candlelight, recording what he can. Names, wounds, survival. Sometimes small drawings. Sometimes nothing at all. The candle burns low. His hands are sore. His back aches. But he does not stop, because morning brings more broken men. In truth, the barber surgeon learns more than most scholars. He sees inside the body not in drawings, but in life. He knows the color of healthy muscle, the sound of bone snapping, the way infection creeps, first by smell, then by heat. He begins to understand what works and what kills, not from theory, but from repetition. He becomes a strange blend of butcher, healer, witness, and priest. His skills grow in secret. His knowledge passes from hand to hand, never written, only shown. Some become famous. Most remain nameless, but their work carries forward. One wound at a time, one man at a time. In the end, the battlefield quiets again. The carts roll out, heavy with the dead. The wounded are taken to churches, to barns, to tents where flies hum and light falls in streaks. The surgeon walks away from the field, his apron stiff, his eyes hollow. He will sleep poorly. He will eat little, but he will be ready tomorrow, because there will always be another battle, and someone must cut, someone must cauterize, someone must stand between the blade that takes and the blade that saves. Segment 6. The monastic healers, when silence met science. The cloister is hushed, save for the soft crunch of sandals on gravel and the low rustle of leaves in the walled garden. A bell tolls distantly, not a call to arms, but gentle summoning, marking the hours of prayer, of reading, of tending to the earth. The light filters through arched windows, falling like gold on stone floors worn smooth by generations of quiet footsteps. You are far now from the chaos of villages, the uncertainty of physicians, the sharp edge of barber surgeons' blades. Here, in this enclosed world, life moves by a slower rhythm, a rhythm not of pain and reaction, but of observation, contemplation, and care. And it is within this stillness that healing takes a different form. The monasteries of medieval Europe, scattered across valleys, hills, and coasts, were more than places of worship. They were centers of knowledge, often the only ones where books were read, copied, and preserved with reverence. And among the texts copied painstakingly by monks, letter by letter, illuminated with symbols and careful margins, were medical treatises, ancient texts from Greece and Rome, saved from destruction, translated from Arabic, and passed down through generations of scribes. You might imagine a young monk had bent over parchment, transcribing the words of Galen, Hippocrates, or Dioscorides. His pen scratches steadily, a candle flickering by his side, illuminating words about humors, fevers, and the healing properties of herbs. He may not understand all he copies, but he knows the work is sacred, a transmission of memory, of science, of possible salvation for those in pain. These manuscripts, bound in leather and stacked carefully on wooden shelves, form the earliest libraries of medical learning in the Christian world. While urban centers argue and forget, while superstition swells outside monastery walls, these quiet halls hold on to fragments of reason. But knowledge alone does not heal. It is in the herb gardens, just beyond the cloister walkways, that theory meets practice. Imagine stepping into one of these gardens in the soft morning light. The air is cool and earthy. Bees hum lazily between rows of flowering plants. A monk in a plain wool robe tends to a patch of sage, his hands stained green at the fingertips. Nearby, you see chamomile, its small white blossoms nodding in the breeze. Rue, bitter and strong. Valerian, with roots used to calm the anxious. Wormwood, sharp and defensive. Each plant is placed with care, grown not for beauty but for purpose. These gardens are not wild nor decorative. They are structured, curated pharmacies, living shells of healing arranged by season, sun, and soil. A Benedictine monastery might cultivate dozens of species, each with known or suspected medical benefits. Monks observe their growth, collect their parts, dry them in shaded rooms, and store them in earthen pots and cloth sachets. Recipes are copied from manuscripts, adjusted by experience, and shared only with those trusted to prepare them correctly. Inside, a small infirmary waits, not grand but clean. Beds are narrow, straw-filled, lined in linen. Patients are usually other monks, travelers in distress, or poor villagers brought in quietly. The monk physician does not wear silk or chant Latin over star charts. He observes, He listens. He brings tea steeped from the garden. He lays a cool cloth over the brow. He may apply a salve to a wound, or offer warm milk laced with honey to soothe a cough. His healing is not showy. It is not immediate, but it is gentle, consistent, and grounded in centuries of learning passed through hand, soil, and ink. Some monasteries keep herbals, books where illustrations of plants are carefully drawn beside descriptions of their properties. These books are treasures, filled with marginalia and notes in different hands across decades. They are not just records, but conversations across time, preserved by men who believed that to heal was an act of devotion, a form of praise. And when medicine outside falters, when urban physicians cling to theory over reality, when barbers cut without understanding, these quiet men keep planting, keep copying, keep learning. They are not perfect. They are limited in what they know. They sometimes cling to humors, to old superstitions, to ideas long outdated. But they also preserve what might otherwise have been lost. A belief that healing can be gentle, that medicine can be written, and that care can come not from power, but from peace. In these cloisters, the memory of ancient medicine sleeps, not forgotten, but resting, waiting for a world that will someday be ready to remember. The wind here smells different, cleaner, calmer, as if time itself moves more slowly within the monastery walls. Perhaps it's a stone, thick and quieting, absorbing the noise of the world beyond. Or perhaps it is the rhythm of life inside, where bells ring not to mark emergencies, but to gently call monks to prayer, to meals, to sleep. It is in such places, behind cloisters, under arches, in long corridors worn smooth by sandal feet, that some of the most important remnants of medical wisdom are kept alive. Not in the bustling cities, where physicians prescribe bleeding and humors are balanced with fire, but here, in spaces of silence and routine, where knowledge is copied, not challenged, and preserved not for profit, but for continuity. Imagine a monk, seated at a sloped wooden desk, the weight of a vellum manuscript beneath his ink-stained fingers. The candle beside him flickers softly, illuminating looping script. His quill scratches gently, letter by letter, across the page, a slow, steady echo of words first written centuries before. The text he copies may be a translation of Galen or Hippocrates, or even Dioscorides the Materia Medica, an ancient compilation of medicinal plants and their uses. These names mean little to the world outside, where barbers reach for their knives. But here they are sacred. This is no ordinary act of transcription. It is a ritual, a meditation. With each line, the monk binds the past to the present, carrying forward a fragile thread of ancient medical thought. Without these quiet hands, much of it would vanish. Fire and war consume books quickly, but parchment, ink, and patience, they defy destruction. Shelved carefully in wooden armoires, these manuscripts form the earliest European medical libraries. Few in number, but rich in content. They contain drawings of herbs, instructions for their preparation, diagrams of the human body as it was understood, and reflections on the soul's role in health. The texts are often beautifully illustrated, with colored inks, gold leaf, and delicate borders curling like vines. And outside the scriptorium, just beyond the cloister walkway, the ideas in these texts are brought to life. The monastic herb garden is a place of careful design. Narrow paths divide beds of fragrant, flowering plants, not chosen for appearance, but for use. Each corner of the garden serves a purpose. The southern wall might be lined with rosemary and thyme, warm and aromatic. The shaded side may host mint, chamomile, and lemon balm, calming herbs for the sick and sleepless. A monk tends the plants with quiet devotion. His robe brushes the soil as he leans in, inspecting the delicate white blossoms of elderflower or the jagged leaves of yarrow. He knows their names, not only in Latin, but in the soft local tongue. He knows when to pick them, how long to dry them, and what ailments they might ease. This is not folk magic. This is careful, observational science, passed from one pair of hands to the next. Some of these monasteries, particularly Benedictine houses, cultivate over 100 species of medicinal plants. The rule of Saint Benedict encourages care for the sick, and so the garden becomes a vital part of monastic life. The infirmary nearby is stocked not only with bandages and linens, but with glass jars filled with dried petals, roots, oils, and infused spirits. Every shelf is labeled in looping script, every remedy cataloged. Even the architecture supports healing. Infirmaries are built with south-facing windows for warmth. Walls are thick to muffle noise. Beds are spaced for air to flow. Some monasteries even channel spring water through their grounds, believing that fresh water, clean air, and quietude are part of God's medicine. And indeed they are. The monks treat the sick not with force, but with observation. They do not rush. They do not claim divine authority over disease. They sit beside their patients. They notice how the fever rises and falls. They touch foreheads, listen to breathing, apply poultices made from garden salves. If the patient worsens, they adjust. If the patient improves, they record. Over time, this creates a culture of medical learning grounded in empathy, not ego. These records, often written in Latin on sheets of bound parchment, describe symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. They are not theoretical. They are practical, based on what worked and what did not. And in this way, monasteries become early centers of clinical observation long before the idea exists elsewhere. Occasionally, these practices are influenced by Arabic medical texts brought into Europe through Spain and Sicily. Monks who can read these translations begin to expand their understanding, copying works by Avicenna or Al-Razi. These texts offer new insights into anatomy, diagnosis, and pharmacology, enriching the monastic approach. What results is a uniquely hybrid form of healing, part faith, part science, part tradition, and part experiment. And though imperfect, it stands in sharp contrast to the bloodletting and purging found outside the cloister. The monastic healer does not seek fame. His remedies are not sold in markets. His texts are not widely read. But without him, the wisdom of the ancients would have faded into ash. Without him, the concept of medicine as something to be learned, refined, and remembered would have been lost to sword and superstition. In this way, the monastery becomes a lighthouse, its flame small but steady. Amid the dark tide of plague, of ignorance, of suffering, offers a glimmer of something older, something gentler. A whisper of healing passed from ink to root, from prayer to poultice, from one careful generation to the next. The chapel bell rings again, a low, sonorous tone. It marks the passing of another hour, perhaps prime or terse, depending on the day. The monks pause. Even in the infirmary, where the ill are tended gently in beds of straw and linen, there's a brief stillness, a moment where the world narrows to breath and silence. Prayer begins not as performance, but as rhythm, not to distract from healing, but to become part of it. In the medieval monastery, the sacred and the practical are never far apart. A monk may recite a psalm with one hand resting lightly on a patient's forehead, gauging heat and breath. Another may murmur the Pater Noster as he grinds herbs with a stone pestle, mixing a salve that will be applied just before Compline. Healing here is not merely about the body. It is about the whole self, treated in time with God's light and the earth's offerings. This is a unique character of monastic medicine, a practice neither wholly spiritual nor purely empirical, but rather a blend of quiet observation and sacred rhythm. A wound is not only a tear in the flesh, it is a mark upon the whole being. And so the monk treats both, with balm and with prayer. In the monastic infirmary, patients are bathed in warm water drawn from wells or channeled through rudimentary aqueducts. The water is heated slowly over coals, infused sometimes with herbs, lavender to calm, rosemary to cleanse. The monk speaks little. He lets the warmth speak instead, washing away the dirt of road or field, preparing the body for treatment. The act is not rushed. Nothing in the monastery ever is. The care is gentle, measured, and always accompanied by a silent plea to Saint Raphael, patron of healing. The salves applied afterward are thick and fragrant. Beeswax, olive oil, and crushed plants, carefully measured by hand, are stirred into cloth-wrapped jars. The monk may press a mixture of marigold and honey into a wound, murmuring a line from Scripture. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. Not for show and not out of obligation, but because in this world, healing is as much a prayerful act as it is a medical one. Many of the plants used are grown within steps of the patient's bed. The physic garden, arranged just outside the cloister walk, ensures that treatment is always near. Elderflower for fevers, plantain for sores, arnica for bruising, The monk recognizes their scent before he sees them. His fingers know how to twist just the right leaf from the stem at the right time of day, in the right season. These rhythms of plant and prayer form a kind of medicine deeply attuned to the natural world. And beyond the tools, the herbs, and the water, there's another key element: observation. Unlike some contemporary physicians, who may rely more on learned doctrine than on the patient condition, the monastic healer observes closely. He watches how the patient breathes during sleep. He notes whether the fever rises at night or in the day. He asks simple questions and listens without interrupting. He watches for patterns in urine, in pulse, in skin tone, using his senses not as supplements, but as instruments of study. There are no titles, no ranks. The healer here does not dress in gold-trimmed robes or carry ornate instruments. His robes are the same as his brothers. His tools are worn from years of use. And his pride is not in prestige, but in consistency. One wound after another, one night after the next, he tends. Sometimes, the treatment is purely physical. A poultice of comfrey and clay to draw out infection, or a tincture of poppy to ease pain. Other times, the healing is entirely spiritual. A confession, spoken in whispers beside a fevered bed. The laying on of hands with oil. The slow reading of a psalm until the patient falls asleep. More often, it is both. In cases of long illness, consumption, or the wasting fevers common in winter, monks do not separate suffering into clean categories. They offer food when it is accepted, rest when it is needed, and words when they might soothe. They do not promise recovery, but they promise presence. And that, in the end, is what distinguishes monastic medicine. Where others may impose treatment with force, here it is offered like bread. It is not always effective. Monks, like all medieval healers, operate within limited understanding. They believe in the four humors. They still see disease as a potential sign of sin. But within that framework, they cultivate something precious: gentle, consistent care. This care extends beyond the physical buildings of the monastery. In nearby villages, news sometimes spreads of a particular brother known for curing wounds or for easing childbirth with herbal infusions. Locals come quietly, often without formal invitation. The monk does not turn them away. He offers what he can: a jar of balm, a prayer, a seat near the fire while fever passes. In this way, the monastery becomes not only a place of study or worship, but a sanctuary, not because it performs miracles, but because it witnesses suffering without turning away, because it treats illness not as punishment, but as part of the human condition, something to be endured, eased, and understood. The patient who recovers here leaves not only stronger, but often changed. He has been listened to. He has been bathed, tended, and prayed over. He has been seen as a soul, not just a wound. And even when healing fails, when death approaches softly, it is met not with fear, but with ritual. Candlelight, psalmody, the presence of a brother's hand in the final hour. These moments linger, carried on in letters and copied manuscripts, in oral traditions passed from one monastic generation to the next. And so the legacy of monastic healing grows not through innovation, but through devotion. Quiet, persistent, unglamorous care, steeped in scripture, soil, and the slow turning of time. There is a difference, subtle but deep, between being treated and being cared for. In the bustling cities of the medieval world, the sick often experience the former, swiftly, sternly, and without much question. But here, in the slow-turning world of the monastery, it is the latter that lingers. Urban medicine, even in its most scholarly form, tends toward doctrine over experience. Physicians are trained in universities, their knowledge gleaned from thick volumes written centuries before. They dress in long robes of red or black. They speak in Latin. Their consultations are brief, their manner often distant. They do not always touch their patients. Sometimes, they examine only the color of urine, or consult an astrological chart, or make their diagnosis based on humoral imbalance, and then prescribe vomiting, purging, or bleeding. These treatments are rarely gentle. They are done with force and flourish. A patient might be bled without ever being listened to. A fevered child may be purged of imagined excess bile. The ill are treated as puzzles to solve, bodies to correct. The person behind the pain is often secondary. By contrast, the monk healer approaches with less training, yes, but often more attention. He may not be versed in every theory of Galen, but he watches closely. He knows the rhythm of a neighbor's breathing, the changes in skin tone, the patterns in appetite and sleep. He sits beside the patient longer. He asks fewer questions, but waits longer for the answers. And when he treats, he does so with hands made gentle by repetition, not rank. The tools of the monastery are simple: poultices, broths, herbs, oils. There are no gold-handled knives or elaborate syringes, but there is cleanliness, quiet, and consistency. The sick sleep on clean linens. Their wounds are washed, not just once, but daily. They are read to, prayed over, and checked during the night. No servant shuffles through the room with haste. The care is calm, slow, human. Where a city doctor may prescribe castor oil or antimony, harsh substances meant to purge the system, the monk may offer a tisane of chamomile and honey, warm and soothing. Where a physician may cauterize a sore, the monk may apply marigold salve, wrap it gently, and watch it over days, changing the dressing as needed. And in many cases, this works better. Not because it is more scientific, but because it is less damaging. The body, already fighting illness, does not need to be shocked or wrung out. It needs rest. It needs nourishment. It needs gentle touch, warmth, and time. The monastery offers all these things. Modern scholars reviewing monastic records have noted this difference. While city practices led often to further harm, infection from instruments, worsening dehydration from purging, monastic records show lower mortality in some infirmaries, particularly for long illnesses where patience, not intervention, is key. This is not to romanticize monastic medicine. Monks still relied on flawed theories. They too believed in humors. They sometimes mistook spiritual illness for physical and vice versa. But their approach, grounded in continuity of care, in observation, and in quiet presence, often did less harm. And in an age where doing no harm was already a rare and valuable skill, that was no small thing. There is also emotional healing to consider. In a monastery, the sick are not isolated, but included. They are part of a daily rhythm: bells, meals, prayers. They do not lie in silence, but in song. Even when very ill, they are not alone. Someone visits. Someone prays. Someone reads from scripture by candlelight. This atmosphere, intangible though it may seem, creates comfort. It slows the racing mind. It soothes fear. And this too is healing, not in the curing sense, but in the deeply human sense of being seen, tended, and remembered. In the monastery, there is no fee, no hurried visit, no long wait to be summoned. There's only the slow, sacred work of healing, one cloth change, one herb steeped, one breath at a time. And so, while the city's advanced theory and barbers practice with steel, it is behind quiet stone walls that some of the most humane care of the medieval world quietly persisted. It left no grand legacy. Perhaps no schools, no titles, no great discoveries. But it left something else, a model of healing as presence, not dominance, as service, not spectacle. And in the stillness of those gardens, the rustle of sage, the scent of lavender, and the hush of voices in prayer, that legacy still lingers. Segment 7, Midwives and Wise Women, Healing Beyond the Church. The church bell is distant now. In its place is a windmill's creak, the quiet bleat of a goat, the flicker of firelight in a rural hearth. The stone walls of the monastery are long behind us. Here, medicine does not come with parchment, nor does it wear a habit. Here, healing lives in calloused hands and memory. A child is about to be born. In a modest home, dimly lit by a beeswax candle and warmed by a fire low in the hearth, a midwife kneels by the straw-stuffed bedding of a laboring woman. There is no fanfare. No men are present. No physician, no priest. Just a woman, her breath heavy and rhythmic, and the midwife, a figure of quiet confidence, aged perhaps by sun and experience more than by years. She has no diploma, no scroll. Her knowledge has been passed down orally, through whispered advice in kitchens, long walks in fields, and evenings of watching and learning. She knows how to measure a pulse by touch, how to recognize when a child has turned in the womb, how to prepare a tea of raspberry leaves to ease the pain, or an infusion of nettle and thyme to stem blood if it flows too freely. This knowledge, though unrecorded, is immense. It is born not of books, but of repetition, of births attended, of fevers soothed, of death observed and sometimes prevented. She knows what helps and what harms, not because she's been taught, but because she has seen. She has stayed up through nights of coughing. She has felt for the warmth of fevered brows. She has measured the hours between contractions, not by clock, but by instinct. And she has guided children into the world with hands that do not tremble. The midwife is not only a deliverer of life, she is also a healer of everyday ills. When a child has colic, she brews fennel and anise. When a man returns from the field with a twisted ankle, she wraps it in cabbage and vinegar. When a girl begins her first bleeding and does not understand, it is the midwife who is summoned, not only to soothe the body, but to explain gently what no one else will say. She knows how to make salves of comfrey and calendula. She dries herbs in bundles above the hearth, binds them in linen, and stores them in earthen pots. She makes tinctures of mugwort and angelica. She walks the margins of fields, collecting plants that physicians do not even name. And still, she does more. In villages without access to monasteries or urban doctors, she becomes a health system. When the cough grows wet or the wound festers, it is she who is called, often with no payment but bread, or milk, or simple thanks. She keeps no records, but remembers everything. Whose child lived, whose fever broke, which herbs worked, which prayers comforted. She is healer, historian, and helper, deeply embedded in the life of her community. She is not always called a midwife. In some places, she is a wise woman, a granny, a herb wife. Her tools are simple: cloth, bowls, boiling water, a steady touch. But in her quiet way, she holds together the fragile thread between pain and peace. And in a world where childbirth is dangerous, infection is common, and formal care is far away, her role is irreplaceable. Many of these women train others, younger daughters, nieces, neighbors who watch, assist, and slowly learn. And in this way, healing knowledge passes not through books, but through bodies and lives. From woman to woman, an unbroken line of care stretching across generations. They are not saints. They make mistakes. Their cures are not always effective, but they do not harm for pride. They do not cut for show. They do not purge for theory. They treat what they see, using what they know, and often that is enough. In a time when so much of medicine is built on fear and hierarchy, these women bring something else: presence, understanding, and continuity. They are trusted, they are needed, and for hundreds of years, they are the quiet backbone of everyday health in medieval Europe. No scroll hangs on the wall of her cottage, no seal of approval, no symbol of university learning. Yet still, the villagers come, not with reverence, she would not accept that, but with trust, plain and worn like a favorite shawl. They come because they know she helps, not always perfectly, not always completely, but gently, reliably, and often better than those who carry books and wear red robes. The wise woman, the midwife, the herb wife, whatever name she goes by, practices a form of medicine shaped not by theories or humors, nor by the turning of astrological charts, but by watching and remembering. Her patients are her neighbors. Her observations stretch across lifetimes. If a child's fever always rises at sundown, she knows. If a certain root eases swelling in some, but brings on nausea in others, she knows. She hasn't read Galen, but she knows the color of a healthy tongue, the smell of bad blood, the sound of breathing before a cough turns dangerous. These are the signs she trusts, not invisible fluids, but the body itself speaking plainly, if you know how to listen. In contrast, the formally trained physician, especially in towns and cities, often treats from a distance, and sometimes from pride. His remedies are prescribed from theory, not familiarity. He may not know the patient's name, their habits, or how their illness began. He trusts in rules, in old texts, in diagrams that show the body as a puzzle to solve, rather than a person to comfort. But the midwife or wise woman, she begins with care, not command. She listens longer. She adjusts her treatments based on how the patient responds. If a tea is too bitter, she sweetens it. If a wound is slow to close, she tries another salve. Her medicine is fluid, responsive, humble. This is not lesson knowledge. It is empirical wisdom gathered from practice, from listening, from failure, and from long nights. She is not bound by rigid schools of thought. If a method works, she keeps it. If it fails, she does not repeat out of pride. And because of this, she avoids some of the harsher pitfalls of academic medicine. She does not bleed patients by the pint. She does not purge them until they collapse. She does not press hot irons to their skin or feed them mercury to chase ghosts from their blood. Instead, she brings honey, herbs, warmth, water, and words, the kind that soothe as much as they heal. Many of her remedies are now recognized by modern science. Willow bark, used to ease pain, contains a compound that will become aspirin. Garlic, used for infections, has antimicrobial properties. Chamomile soothes digestion. Yarrow slows bleeding. She knew none of these terms, but she knew what helped. She also knew what not to treat. If a fever burned too long, if the wound smelled of rot, if the labor was far beyond her skill, she would say so. Sometimes she would call for a monk, or even, when necessary, a physician. Her power did not rest in pretending to know everything. It rested in knowing her limits. Perhaps most importantly, her care was whole. It touched not just the body, but the heart. She sang lullabies to calm a mother in labor. She hummed quietly while preparing salves. She wrapped a child in a warm cloth, not just to stop shivering, but to comfort. In a time when survival was uncertain, when pain came often and relief came slowly, this kind of kindness mattered. Sometimes, it mattered more than medicine, and her success showed. Though her cures were simple, the outcomes often surprised. Children she delivered thrived. Wounds she treated healed. Old men lived longer with her teas than with the doctor's tonics. Villagers remembered what worked, and they returned. They returned not out of habit, but because they felt better. And in a world where much medical care made things worse before they improved, if they improve at all, that was no small thing. So while she did not wear a title, and while no university scribed her name in their records, the wise woman held something deeper: the trust of her people. She was not feared or distant. She lived among them, walked the same paths, drew water from the same well. Her strength was not in theory, but in presence. And because her methods were often gentle, grounded, and patient, they frequently succeeded where more aggressive, educated treatments did not. There was a time when the wise woman was welcomed with open doors, when her steps on the village road brought comfort, when her jar of comfort salve, her willow bark tea, her birthing hands were met with quiet gratitude. But in the later Middle Ages, that trust begins to erode, not because her skills failed or her hands changed, but because the world around her did. As church authority grew, as doctrine hardened, as fear crept like ivy through the edges of fields and towns, the woman who once healed with herbs began to be seen with narrowed eyes. She did not change, but how she was seen did. The church, expanding in influence, sought to regulate all aspects of life, including who could touch the body, who could claim knowledge, who would heal. Medicine, once the work of many hands, became a matter of control. Priests, monks, and eventually university-trained doctors were seen as the rightful caretaker of the health and the soul. And those outside that framework, particularly women, especially poor ones, were slowly pushed to the margins. At first, it was subtle, a quiet discouragement, a question here or there, a frown when the midwife was called instead of the parish priest. But in time, suspicion bloomed, especially in places where tragedy struck. A baby born still, a crop failed, a sickness lingered. People searched for a reason, and too often, they found it in the woman who had stood by silently, who knew too much, who spoke to plants and walked alone. Whispers grew, accusations formed, not just of poor treatment, but of unnatural power. She knows too much, they said. She talks to animals. She carries dried toads in her apron. She sang something strange while brewing that tea. That child was fine until she visited. The line between healer and witch blurred. It did not matter that she had delivered dozens of children safely. that she had eased the fever of half the village, that she had cured burns with honey and milk when others could not. Her skill, once a source of trust, became a mark of danger. The fear was not just of her herbs, but of her independence. She answered to no institution. She took no vows. She worked alone by instinct, not by scripture. And in a time when conformity was safety, that made her dangerous. It didn't help that some of her knowledge resembled magic, not in truth, but in appearance. She buried placenta beneath trees. She whispered old words while tying healing knots. She used charms and amulets, sometimes carved from bone, sometimes painted with strange symbols passed through generations. To the church, this was uncomfortably close to heresy. And when witch hunting fever swept across Europe in the late Middle Ages and into the early modern period, many of those caught in its fire were midwives and herb women, women who had long practiced quiet, helpful work, now seen as agents of the devil. Some were interrogated under threat or pain, asked whether they used animal parts, whether they spoke with spirits, whether they flew at night. Some confessed, not from truth, but from exhaustion. Others stayed silent. It mattered little. Once suspicion took hold, it spread faster than any remedy could slow it. The irony was sharp. These women had done what no one else dared, sat with the dying, delivered the living, soothed the suffering. And now they were punished for it. Even those not formally charged felt the chill. Averted gazes, doors closed sooner, parish priests warning against old ways. Over time, the number of midwives shrank. Some continued quietly, others stopped altogether. A centuries-old line of oral knowledge began to fracture. The village lost something when she left, not just her remedies, but her presence, her calmness in the night, her memory of every birth, every scar, every fever broken. In chasing away what it feared, the church, and by extension, the community, forgot what it had once trusted. Of course, not all midwives were persecuted. Many continued, some adapted, operating with church blessing, attending with priests, softening their methods to fit new expectations. But something had shifted. Healing was no longer a shared inheritance. It was now a thing to be licensed, watched, and regulated. What remained of the old ways lingered in shadows, in whispered recipes, in hidden gardens, in notebooks passed secretly between generations of women who understood the danger of knowing too much, but could not bear to let the knowledge disappear. And so, the wise woman became a symbol not just of healing, but of resilience, of quiet resistance, of care that refused to die, even when outlawed. Her story, lost in so many official records, survives in folktales, in rhymes, in half-remembered remedies passed from grandmother to grandchild. She may have been called a witch, but she was, and always had been, a healer. Segment 8. From superstition to science, the slow dawn of change. In a dim library, far from battlefields and infirmaries, a monk tilts his head toward the page. The script is unfamiliar, flowing right to left, dotted with delicate curves, but his task is steady. Word by word, he translates Arabic into Latin. His quill scratches across parchment, quiet and persistent. With every line, something long lost is slowly remembered. This is where the dawn begins, not with discovery, but with a translation. By the late Middle Ages, Europe begins to look outward. The Crusades, so brutal, have opened doors not only to new lands, but to new ideas. In places like Spain, where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars sometimes live side by side, texts once thought lost to the West begin to surface again, preserved and expanded by Islamic scholars over centuries of intellectual flourishing. Works by Hippocrates and Galen, long forgotten in many corners of Europe, are returned in the form of Arabic commentaries. But more than that, these translations introduce entirely new names. Avicenna raises Al-Zarawi, physicians and thinkers who wrote with precision, observation, and reason. These scholars described symptoms and syndromes with clarity. They classified diseases. They discussed the spread of infection, the importance of hygiene, and even the effects of environment on health. And they did something rare for the medieval world. They observed patients systematically and took notes. When their ideas reach Europe, carried by traders, pilgrims, and scholars, they begin to challenge the old frameworks. Not immediately, not loudly, but steadily. In Salerno, Italy, a medical school takes form, one of the first in Europe, where translated texts are studied alongside local practice. In Paris and Bologna, university physicians begin to supplement humoral theory with these new ideas. They still speak in Latin. They still consult the stars. But a shift is beginning. Suddenly, it is not enough to say that illness comes from sin. Scholars start to ask, where does pain begin? What organ fails? How does the body truly function? Anatomy, for so long considered taboo, begins to stir from its long slumber. Not yet in the public square, autopsy remains rare and often frowned upon. But in private, in hushed corners of learning, the body is looked at again, not just feared, not just prayed over, studied. It is a fragile moment full of contradiction. A physician may read Avicenna by candlelight in the evening, but prescribe bloodletting by morning. He may admire the rationality of raises, while still attributing seizures to demonic influence. The past does not vanish in a breath, but the return of these texts plants seeds of skepticism, of curiosity, of something deeper than faith or fear. It reminds Europe that there is more to healing than ritual, that observation, comparison, and patient experience can offer answers beyond the stars. And though the process is slow, unbearably slow, it is a beginning. The barber surgeon still bleeds. The village still wears garlic. But somewhere, a student is copying out Galen's notes side by side with Avicenna's corrections. Somewhere, a monk is writing in the margin, observe first, treat second. And in that quiet shift, in ink and parchment, not fire and steel, medieval medicine begins to lean just slightly toward what we might now call science. Asterisk. The year is sometime in the 13th century. The city, perhaps Paris or Bologna or Montpellier, smells of tallow smoke and wet stone. In one of its oldest buildings, behind thick wooden doors, a lecture is beginning. The room is bare, cold in winter, and filled with the scratch of quills. At the front, a teacher, more priest and physician in dress, begins to read aloud. The students, seated on hard benches, listen, pause, copy. The text he reads is old. Galen, perhaps, or Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, recently translated into Latin. But unlike the wise women and monks who work in silence, these young men are being taught formally, in order, in logic, and in Latin. It is a new chapter in the long history of care. Universities in medieval Europe begin first as places of theology and law, concerned with the soul and with governance. But by the 12th and 13th centuries, medicine joins them, though always with less authority. After all, bodies are less eternal than souls. Still, the study of healing finds a place, slowly, carefully, and with rules. To study medicine is to be literate, male, and often wealthy. Entry is restricted. The poor cannot afford tuition. Women are entirely barred. The wise woman, the midwife, the village herbalist, they remain outside these walls. Their knowledge does not count here. Inside, medicine is studied like scripture through texts. Anatomy is learned from books, not bodies. Dissection is rare and controversial. Most professors do not treat patients. They read, they discuss, they debate. The humors still dominate. Astrology remains central, and practical training is minimal. But still, something important is happening. For the first time in many generations, medicine is being treated as a discipline, not a mystery. It is being grouped with philosophy, theology, and law, and subjected to logic. Students compare treatments. They argue over symptoms. They take exams, earn degrees, and, most importantly, begin to pass their learning to others. Hospitals begin to appear near these universities. Crude by modern standards, they still represent a new concept, organized care. Physicians trained in the university may visit them. They may not always help, but they begin to observe, to record, to try. In time, licensing begins. Cities, under pressure from guilds and councils, start to regulate who may call himself a physician. A patchwork of rules grows. No bleeding unless certified. No surgeries without oversight. No medicine sold without approval. It is inconsistent, often corrupt, but it reflects a shift from informal care to formal structure. the knowledge remains flawed. Much still rests on humors, on imbalance, on inherited theory. But even within those frameworks, there is refinement. The remedies become slightly less brutal. Treatments are compared. Some are discarded, others improved. The seeds of critical thought, though small, are planted, and the setting matters. In a university, ideas can be shared. A student in Paris can discuss with one in Padua. A text translated in Toledo can be debated in Oxford. Slowly, medicine becomes a conversation, not a private practice. Ideas begin to move faster than people, and that is new. Still, the path is far from straight. Physicians remain aloof from patients. Surgeons are often considered low status. Herbalists and midwives remain excluded entirely. Women are still accused of witchcraft for doing what university men now do in Latin. But the concept of medicine is beginning to change. No longer just prayer, no longer just poultices and purging. It is now something that can be taught, questioned, tested, however imperfectly, and passed on in structured form. The early university-trained physician is not always effective, but he is part of a turning tide, one that will, centuries later, make room for microscopes and vaccines, for anatomy labs and hospitals as we know them. For now, it is enough that he listens, that he studies, that he begins to wonder not only what the stars say, but what the body itself might teach. The room is cold. Stone walls hold in the night air. The candles flicker low, their smoke curling toward vaulted ceilings. A group of men, robed and silent, stand around a wooden table. Upon it lies a human body, not as an object of mourning or fear, but of study. This is not common. This is not public, but it is new. For centuries, the human body in Europe was off limits, sacred, untouchable in death. Dissection was associated with punishment, or worse, with sin. The soul's journey was thought to depend on the body's wholeness. To cut it open was to violate something divine. But ideas like tides shift slowly, and by the late Middle Ages, the question begins to rise. How can we heal what we do not understand? The old books were no longer enough. Galen had written widely, yes, but his knowledge came from animals, not people. His diagrams, long used in universities, were based on apes and pigs. And those who practiced medicine, especially surgeons, began to notice the reality did not always match the page. And so, carefully, almost fearfully, some began to open the human body, not in secret chambers of horror, but in guarded academic settings, monitored, supervised, done for learning, not punishment. At first, it was occasional. A condemned criminal, a body unclaimed. The dissection was allowed as a rare privilege, an anatomical lesson, performed quickly, sometimes even read aloud as a surgeon cut. One man read Galen's text, another matched the parts, and it was transformative. They saw the truth beneath the skin, the structure of muscle, the placement of organs, the pathways of blood, not mystical, not humoral, but real, observable, and intricate. Slowly, physicians began to trust what they saw more than what they were told, and what they saw did not always match ancient texts. Discrepancies arose. Galen said the liver had 5 lobes. It had 4. He claimed the heart had a mysterious third cavity. It did not. Slowly, reverence gave way to inquiry. Dissection became a method, not a violation, a practice. It remained rare, once a year, perhaps at the university. But its impact rippled outward. Drawings were made, notes taken, new diagrams circulated, based on actual human anatomy, not theory. And with these drawings came a quiet revolution. The body was no longer a vessel of sin or an echo of the stars. It was a system, understandable, teachable, complex, yes, but not unknowable. For the first time in many centuries, medicine began to look inside, literally and metaphorically. It was still imperfect. Bloodletting continued. Astrological charts were still consulted, but something had changed. Fear had given way, if not to comfort, then to curiosity. The human form, long hidden beneath layers of superstition, doctrine, and fear, began to speak for itself. Its structures told stories. Its patterns gave hints. And those who listened carefully enough began to understand not just how to treat the body, but how to learn from it. This change did not happen overnight. It would take centuries for anatomy to become standard, for hospitals to become centers of learning, for medicine to abandon its medieval ghosts. But the first cracks had formed. The first lessons had been drawn. The first questions, brave and gentle, had been asked. And through these first careful autopsies, the body, once feared, forbidden, and misunderstood, became a teacher. Conclusion. And so we return, not to the castle, nor the monastery, nor the village lane, but to this quiet moment, wherever you are now, still, safe, listening. We have wandered through shadowed infirmaries and flickering candlelight. We've stood beside beds of fever, where garlic and prayer mingle with hope. We've watched the barber's blade rise, heard the monk's whisper, felt the tremble of a midwife's steady hands. We have seen illness blamed on the stars and health sought in leeches and herbs, in charts and charms, in silence and song. It was not science, not yet, but it was something deeply human. It was the attempt, flawed, often desperate, sometimes wise, to ease suffering when so little was understood. They bled to balance, burned to cure, prayed to cleanse. They opened skulls to quiet madness. They feared disease as judgment and healing as divine grace. And all the while, they walked in darkness, guided by memory, myth, and instinct. But from that darkness came glimmers. In the cloistered study of a monk copying Avicenna, in the whispered remedy passed from mother to daughter, in the careful drawing of a lung or liver, real at last and no longer imagined. In the first moment someone asked, quietly, courageously, what if the body tells the truth? That question would echo forward. It would lead in time to microscopes and stethoscopes, to sterile rooms and shared knowledge, to healing that does not rely on ritual alone. But tonight, we do not leap ahead. We rest here, at the threshold between fear and understanding, between superstition and science, between suffering and the hope to ease it. If your eyes are closed now, let them remain so. If your breath is slowed, let it stay gentle. You are far from the world we visited. There are no leeches at your bedside, no charts above your head, no sharp iron, no whispered prayers for balance. Only this stillness, this safety, this now. And if sleep finds you, as it often does in quiet company, let it come gently, like the closing of an ancient door, behind which the ghosts of old medicines may finally rest. You are here. You are well. Once again, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so we have more motivation to produce better quality products. And now, good night.